Hey guys, it's Doa. You may think to yourself, hey, Doa's too nice to be on Thorin's channel. Why is he there? And you're right. He's locked me in his closet, and I'm being forced to record this. Help.
Right, this is an episode of Narrative Week. You figure out the numbers. I'm not a fucking pencil pusher slave to the system. Who even knows? Maybe the decimal system is actually some sort of matrix thought control created by the archons of this realm to trap us all within their numbers. I'm not like that. I'm a free spirit, you have to understand. I exist. Something about crystals, I don't know. I was trying to connect something with free association there. This show, if people have been watching the last, say, I think maybe 5 episodes, has transitioned a little bit. We've become a show that specifically, we pick a topic. We do make it pretty broad, I will say, because we like to have fun and go on tangents and stuff. But it's not a show where we're going to talk about like, right, why is Echo Fox lost this week again? It's like, no, like we'll leave that to the other shows. They've got that sort of handled, and that's the sort of pleb talk that everyone else has got nailed, I think. So what we're going to do on this particular episode is our guest here is Midbeast. I'll give him a brief introduction just because it's probably good if I could learn how to do those after about 20 years in the industry. So he's actually someone who, before you all start hating on him, jokes aside, obviously you're going to hate on him regardless of whether I say this or not. In fact, this information might make you hate on him more. Was actually a competitive player. I would say... Right. Because I'm mean, semi-pro level, because even though you did play on the professional level in Australia, you were on some of the not that great teams. And quite frankly, listen, I'm not hating on anyone, but I don't think even some of the best Australian players are like full-time pros in the same sense that some of the Westerners are, you know. So he did play competitively is the point. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because to me, that establishes a bit of credibility. To idiots, of course, I've noticed no amount of accomplishments can actually do that. Like, I could have forgiven on a podcast a guy who came to the semis of Worlds, and people would still be like, shut the fuck up. Why is he talking about Reckless? All he did is go to the semis of Worlds. Like, you can't win. So we've learned that a long time ago. Kelsey can win as many championships as a coach. Literally, LS could climb as high as he likes in the Korean ladder. Loco actually did win literal championships in the region he talks about. But I've learned a long time ago, to a hater, you can never attain credibility as far as I'm concerned. So what we're going to do is... the main aspect that I know Midbeast for is obviously his YouTube content, where he specializes. Obviously, he was a mid laner when he played competitively. And on his YouTube channel, he has probably one of the more interesting channels, I think, because he doesn't try to talk about the broad world of League of Legends. He doesn't try to break down a whole match. He takes his role mid lane and quite usually specifically solo queue, and he takes often legendary players in solo queue, and he gives you like his perspective on how they're playing. Like for a start off, one area I remember finding your videos first was obviously all the Apto videos. Back in the days when there was practically no content on Apto, I can tell you right now, if you go to his YouTube channel, it'll be in the description, go to the little search box on there, type in Apto, you're going to find minimum 30 videos. Like there's going to be a lot there. Give us some thoughts on like... would you agree with that characterization? Is that kind of your specialization?
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. I just try and break down mid lane as simple as I can, man. Pretty much like a dumb man's mid lane. I just try and break it down. I don't think it's that complex. I try and help out lower elo players that kind of climb up. You've got like the higher analysis people like LS. They want to break down like super micro stuff. I just try and break it down as simple as I can, man. Just help people out to climb. That's all I try and do, honestly.
So we thought the reason why it would be a good episode to get Midbeast in for is to have a discussion about mid lane in the LCS, the NA region specifically. But obviously, if you know the context of this show, we're not talking about just now. We're talking about any time. We can go right back in history and we'll see what threads we pick up and where we go with it. And some people, who knows how much we'll talk about them. Some people maybe will go super in depth with loads of tangents. Hopefully, that's the way I like to do things anyway. So first things first, Midbeast. Obviously, when you talk about competitive play, right, it's already tough enough if people want to go back to like season 1 and that type of era, because first of all, like half the VODs don't even exist. You had to basically be there. And even if you were there, I can tell you as someone who's known to have a pretty good memory, that's the stuff that fades the fastest because it's actually the least relevant. And in fact, most of those players aren't even around. So what type of era was your first like competitive era in League? And do you remember that particular
first time watching is probably Worlds. It was like season 2 Worlds with, was it, do you remember Toys in the mid lane?
Yeah, playing that was the one.
Oriana.
Yes.
That was like the first time I was kind of getting the league. I would have been like silver, man. I was so terrible, but I was just fascinated with just how this guy got massive like CS leads, lane leads. He was just doing like different like wave management and stuff. And I just thought that was insane. I was only silver. So I was like, I want to copy this guy, and just took off, started grinding, man. But yeah, that's probably like the first entry to was like the World Championships. I was like, holy shit, there's this many people watching like a video game. That's pretty much it, and then it just took off.
That's a pretty healthy dive back in the past. Like I say, season one,
Yeah,
you have to be real. Most people weren't even watching who were even fans back then. They were just playing League of Legends. So, Kelsey, when we laid this topic down, what was the first sort of generation of mids within NA? What was the premise for why you wanted to do this topic? And we'll start from there.
Yeah, I mean, we can start with LCS. I think generally the premise is there's been a lot of conversations surrounding how we got to the point where there aren't that many NA-born mid laners in LCS, right? So I just wanted to kind of like do a short retrospective on sort of the evolution, what a lot of the NA approach to mid and why it was very different and what can be changed, just these kinds of conversations. So yeah, starting season 3 is probably easier. If we just want to do LCS specifically, we can skip season 3, whatever is fine, man.
Okay, so here, obviously, if anyone's watched the last few years of League of Legends and followed like the community discussion, the most famous way you can phrase this is people always used to, on the one hand, like derogatorily call Pobelt the best NA mid, but then the joke was he was the only NA mid, like everyone else was an import. And in fact, I remember there was a stat now that said something like, because Caps has role swapped, the only place you can find Danish mid laners is in the LCS now, which is actually true. If you go and look, there's like 4 of them there or something. So it has gotten ridiculous over the years. And by the way, just to preface this at the beginning of the episode, we will talk about really good mid laners that came to the NA region, Bjergsen, Jensen, etc. But we're not treating them actually as NA mids for this particular reason, because otherwise there's no point, is there? Like, by that logic, there will always be 10 NA mid laners in the LCS as long as they have 10 teams. So if we're going to start around the first generation of LCS, this was actually when, unsurprisingly, because there wasn't as much money in the game back then, there was barely any imports. In fact, as far as I can guess, there would be none, excluding the fact that I think technically people like Nijaki might have had like a visa that meant they weren't actually born in America. So and there might have been some weird fringe case like that, but obviously there was no Bjergsen in the first season. It goes without saying all the other ones came way after him, and there was no Koreans, that goes without saying. So if we start with this era, this was actually an era from what I remember where, listen, because Europe had some of the best mids in the entire world. It's not like NA was fucking with Europe, but actually NA mid was one of the stronger positions from what I remember. In fact, some of the stars were the mid laners. So who do you remember from this era, Midbeast? Who were you a fan of?
It was high, right? It was high season 3?
Yeah, summer of season 3 he came in.
Yeah,
Can you run me through the top 5 mids?
I mean, probably Reginald, High. Let me think. Mancloud was in season 3, Nijaki. Yeah, Skara, so a lot of the classics.
Yeah.
No, there was Link.
That's right, yeah.
Shifter was there. Oh, you had that Vile Rose very briefly before he was replaced.
That's a
so
good
who would you pick out of that
mid lane pool, though.
It's not bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I was watching
High,
all.
I feel like I had like a different
was
style.
Interesting.
He was always an interesting player to watch. Yeah, definitely. Always trying something new, something different. I'm not sure. Reggie, I guess, as well, was always doing kind of strange things in lane. There's like TF coming out and stuff like that. That was good. I honestly couldn't rate them. Like, I can't remember that far back on how they actually performed. I just remember the names. I can't remember any specific games.
Okay.
What about you guys?
I mean, I think there's so for example, like High was actually considered pretty good back then, right?
Sure.
Not just as the way that his reputation became, which was that he's a great shot caller, can talk about the map, but he was considered good mechanically, basically until that World Championship, right? And then he got kind of dunked on by XPK, and I think that's when his reputation slowly started to change completely. But I think that like how he described it, always doing interesting and strange things, kind of characterized a lot of how we saw NA mid play. Like, I always remember watching Skara in season 2, season 3, he would play like only melee champions, right? And then Dignitas was always finding ways to kind of cheese wins, like new strategies, like Soraka mid was something that they came out with in season 2. They played like that's the rock solid team comp. Everyone remembers like the Heimer and the Trundle, right? Stuff like this. Sure. So like, I always remember these types of things. And then Reginald, like the very famous thing, I actually went back and watched a lot of old TSM games, season 2, season 3, and people didn't really think about waves and there was way more willingness to just give up mid wave to the jungler, and so you saw this kind of evolution of like feeding the jungler that way and just going mid and diving. And I think mid was just always not a very selfish role. I think maybe the big exception at this time was ManCloud. I was way more of like the outplay type mid laner, or way more of the aggressive type mid laner. Reginald always just looked for picks like at enemy blue, right? You pick TF, you contest enemy blue buff, you snowball off of that as a team. But I never really saw him like play super hard for lane, right? So this was kind of that time where it felt like there was definitely something missing in terms of having a big carry mid laner out of NA.
I mean, especially, I'll give the contrast here. If you think about what's already going on in Europe, like Season 2 was when all the EU mids that everyone knows now, like the Mount Rushmore of mids, Alex H, Froggen, all fully established themselves. But by Season 3, like we're talking about, they've played like, this is their second year minimum as a top pro. So by that point in time, you already have it fully established that like Froggen's going to farm every single wave and just try to get late game items. Xpeke is going to probably snowball the whole game on some super powerful champion, take over the whole game. You already have in Europe Bjergsen, Nuke coming through. In fact, famously, the summer split of Season 3 was the one where the whole reason why, like, literally no joke, something like 6 of the 8 teams at one point in time were ranked number 1 in EULCS was because everyone had a good mid laner, and so whoever got the OP picks and that week had the right comp just snowballed the fuck out of the game and just took over the match. Like, it wasn't even that. What's funny is that's why I made that original meme, the Jat dilemma, where even though Jat didn't technically say it, it was in the wheelhouse of how someone would downplay Europe. And the reason I did that angle was that to me, the kind of person who was like, this just shows that the region's weak. It's like, it's the other way around, mate. It's like all the teams have like basically a star, and if they power that star up, he can take over the game, because that is what League of Legends is right now. So I would agree, Kelsey. It always was very weird to me. This is why when ManCloud came up in the Vulcan team, I thought he was going to be a star for many years, because he was a guy who you could load up all the resources into and he would just carry the whole game. Whereas, as you're saying, people like Skara, at this point in time, this was the last like big year really of Reginald playing. Like, these players were kind of like an anachronism. Like, I don't really know how they existed in that time period, yet they were still on top teams.
Yeah, I think this was also like Cloud9 coming in summer, like as Midbeast mentioned. This was when you saw this massive shakeup where Cloud9 could go 25-3 or whatever was their score at the time. And because they were actually playing like very, very heavy long range engage comps, right? And they could just catch people out doing that because no one was really ever at the right place or doing the right thing. It felt like very behind in general, and that showed more and more in Season 4 as well. When you had LMQ come over, it felt like the way NA was playing even then. If you go back and watch the VODs in retrospect and compare them to some of the EU games or some other region games, it just felt like it was behind, and everyone was just thinking of like cheesy ways to win.
I remember mid meta. Was that when Meteos was like spamming Nocturne mid? Was that then with the C9 team coming in? Or was that Season 4?
I would guess
that may have been Season 4.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
What about then if we move on from there? Let's just go to the next year. I mean, obviously the next year high is still a relevant factor. Some of the others drop away, you know. It's like they start to be in the worst teams or they just leave the league entirely. And this was when, most notably, it's going to clearly be a key topic to discuss here, Bjergsen arrives in the region, and then basically almost overnight is like, if not the best player, because you could argue maybe High was a better player at mid lane overall, but he was like the best individual mid laner. That was pretty obvious. Like, his mechanics were just ridiculous. He was wrecking all these guys immediately. Like, do you remember early Bjergsen?
I remember him just popping off, man. He had like 30 CS leads at 10, just doing things that nobody else did at the time. And just like, I don't know, his wave control and his wave trading, I remember studying it, and it was so much just more precise than anyone else had kind of done in NA, I felt. And that just allowed him to steamroll. His landing phase was just superb. There was so little mistakes he was making. And I feel like that as a whole, like, obviously when you come in as a mid laner and you're scrimming, everyone's going to slowly work out what he's doing differently and slowly catch up, which I think is what has happened. So, but yeah, at the start, man, he just was doing things that nobody else in NA was doing. But maybe in EU, I felt the EU pool definitely helped them all out in that scrim regard. I feel like they all had really strong lanes in EU. They really know, like, from Froggen and stuff like that. They just knew how to lane correctly, how to trade perfectly and stuff like that.
Actually, by the way, I've got a little anecdote I can tell you just to tie this topic together, which is a couple of years ago, I think, not more than that, now it'd be like almost 4 years ago, when we had a CSGO major that was held in Ohio. At the time, Froggen, because who his girlfriend was at the time, was actually living in that region of America. And I don't think he's a huge fan of CS, but him and his girlfriend basically wanted, she was also in esports, wanted to come along to this major. And so they met us up, like I got them into the after party to the event and stuff. And when we were there was when Ocelot's G2 team had just come into CSGO. They'd been in maybe for I'd say maybe 9 months at that time. And he was pivoting from being just a player and a League of Legends guy to trying to be a proper multi-team owner. And so Ocelot was there. And then when they met up, these two, Froggen and Ocelot, who obviously way back in the day, we're talking like almost this era and before, used to play each other all the time. But now it'd been a few years where they'd been separated. Froggen had been in NA, Ocelot was over in Europe doing his thing. I don't think they'd seen each other for a while. And so they were having like a little catch-up chat. And by the way, this isn't like one of those like private conversations. They're going to be like, how could you violate and say that? Like, they wouldn't care about me saying this story. And basically, they were having one of those like reminiscences over the past where they were talking about like, oh yeah, I remember when I saw you first play the game and then I beat you on this champion or whatever. And what's hilarious is when they were talking, Ocelot basically said to Froggen, like, when you actually started playing professionally, literally none of us knew what the fuck you were doing because we didn't actually understand, like, the importance of just farming the minions. Like, we all thought it was about, like, even if you farm the minions, it was almost like, think about this, right? If you play a low-level solo queue, the analogy I would give you is how you play in the bot lane, which is if you have a set of champions that have the push, you just get to level 2 first, and then your Thresh just flash fucking whatever, flares the other guy while he's still level 1, and you maybe get the kill at like immediately in the game, you snowball the lane. Like, obviously that's not the way you meant to play League of Legends, but at a low level you can play it like that. That's how mid laners used to play mid lane. Like, if you were the Cassiopeia and you got some like weird angle or your jungler could go, you just went like, you did like a flash at like level 3 to try and kill the guy. So when Froggen came along and he just stayed at a normal distance, just farmed all the minions, literally people like Ocelot were thinking like, does he even know what the fuck's he doing? And then even more funny is they used to say they didn't even understand that it was also important to last hit all the minions. Like, they would just use all their spells, push the wave in, and then roam to try and get the kill or try and make a play somewhere. So they were just thinking like, what the fuck is it? Like they couldn't even get the paradigm of what he was doing at the time. So the reason I bring that anecdote up is it's all well and good to think that like in every era, everyone thinks the top pros understand the game at the deepest level and everything about it. But you can always have people who, when they innovate, just even figuring out what they're doing is the hardest part. Never mind copying them.
That's why I love Doomby so much, man. Like, he just come onto the scene, he's doing things, just doing roams and styles that nobody else is doing. I just love that type of setup. And I guess that's what Froggen was doing when he came in.
Doomby's almost regressing back to that era, pre-Froggen era. Just don't last with the minions, go farm the inside.
Don't last hit, just do whatever you want. Yeah. No, he's one of my favorite mids for sure. Well,
we could tie that in then, Kelsey, because obviously the other anecdote, I won't tell a long version of it because you can just go look it up on the internet or literally search for Froggen High Summoning Insight. There was a famous episode of Summoning Insight, I think it was at the end of season 4 or in season 5, where famously Froggen came on, and then when we asked him about High, now listen, low key, I think most people wanted him to flame High because they thought, like, listen, Froggen, you're way better individually than High is, so like, fuck this guy up. Like, if he's the best in NA, like, but what he did was he essentially did in a way, which is he just said, like, when you play High, he's crazy because you're playing and you're farming your wave out and you're playing the matchup, and then he just gives you a whole wave and then roams off on the map to try and get a kill. And it's like, to Froggen, this is just a good counter example because to him, he didn't see what that was. Like, he thought, like, that's just a waste of time. Like, why would I lose the wave? What if you don't get the kill if you go there? Right, Kelsey, what would you say to this? Because obviously this is something that High brought to the game, right? And as if we mirror it to Doimby, if you knew what you were doing in his sense, it also had like implied value you wouldn't see as just a mid laner necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I feel like Doimby and High, I've compared them for a pretty long time because I feel like the big difference between Doimby and High is almost like Doimby kind of embraced that part, whereas High always felt like almost was a little bit slated or felt like the accusations that he's not good mechanically are important in some way, right?
Yes.
Whereas like Doinby is actually very openly embracing, like, I'm not that good mechanically. I play these because I can set up for my jungler, and that was often the dynamic, right? Like Meteos, I think there was a moment where Meteos said that he really liked playing for High because he always got blue buff. He got second blue. He thought High was crazy, but he gave him second blue, like shit like this. So I think that it's interesting that there's a difference, it's an evolution of style, because High always wanted to play like Zed. He wanted to play, and for a while he was decent at Zed, but he wanted to play the mechanical champions. He wanted to be considered a mechanical mid laner, and I think Doinby just doesn't give a fuck, and he just perfects like what he's already good at.
Do you think that maybe High would have had a better career if he just adopted that style, that Doinby style, just I don't give a fuck about mechanics, I'm just going to play for the team kind of style? Or do you think what do you think would have happened?
I actually don't think so, because I think that if a lot of people saw what Bjergsen was doing, right, and the comparison was always like, why aren't our NA mid laners doing this? Yeah. And instead of like waiting for the catch-up period or changing all of that, I think there was like a lot of external pressure on High to be kind of like Bjergsen-esque rather than kind of embracing what he was good at. And so NA mid started evolving more as copying like what Bjergsen does. And the Bjergsen archetype, like right now, he was very good at like just trading in lane at the time, right? And he actually like traded on the wave, and he could push out and play this, but Bjergsen is still a mage player, right? Like quintessentially a mage player. So I think that really shaped the way that we see NA mid and LCS now, is like play for your lane and your wave, like kind of stay there. Mid was almost kind of like a 1v1 in Bjergsen's eyes. And then he's more kind of 70-30 than 60-40. I would say when you watch the trade and opportunities he takes, like there are some opportunities he still doesn't take. And then, you know, the famous, when we had, I think we had Doublelift on, right? In the pre-season.
It was after he left TSM.
Yeah. It was after he left season. And he was like, he talked about how Bjergsen wouldn't leave, and he would say, oh, he can roam on every wave, right? Yes. This kind of situation where he would like really, really force or try to force onto the 1v1 in that way. And I think that improved a little bit recently when you see him playing shit like Akali, but that was definitely, I think, a big part of why we see a lot of Syndra, Ori. Like every time we go to Worlds, it's like, why aren't these players playing Assassins? There are other reasons, obviously, like Ping being a really big one.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
But I think that's been like a big part of the identity of LCS mid lane since.
I mean, I will say, like, just on the High topic, that like I don't, when she says like he saw himself that way Midbeast, I don't think it's that he actually like played the wrong way in the game. I think it's just for whatever reason he perceived himself as being constantly like he thought, like he basically wanted to be adored for the one thing he wasn't, whereas actually everything he was brilliant. I thought he was like a genius at League of Legends in some ways, and actually if you bill him the right way, one of the coolest storylines probably ever of a Western player who came in the same fashion as Doinby coming up through a region with all these mechanical monsters and then winning Worlds with his own style. That's an awesome story. It's actually better in some ways than the standard story. So I would say High's just the kind of guy where it's like to give you an analogy, I know this is not a sport that Australians follow, but if you follow the NFL at all, everyone just wants the quarterback to be the best quarterback. They want the guy who can throw the deep ball with 1 second, a guy right in his face, but he throws like a 40-yard pass, right on the point which is just about having an amazing arm. It's about like, instead of mechanics, they all talk about arm talent and all these like vague terms that no one can fucking quantify. But what they ignore is that there's plenty of quarterbacks. In fact, most of those quarterbacks, even when they're older and they lose just the physical strength you have in your body after working out for that many years, what you basically, the actual role isn't about doing the deep ball all the time. It's actually about just making accurate passes. So there's been a lot of great players, exactly, who just do what they like to call them like whatever they call like dink and whatever, like little, as though you're doing little darts to people just 10 meters away. But what they ignore is that is the American football. That is the core element of the sport. So if you're amazing at that, you can already potentially win championships. You don't have to have the big highlight player. So I would say along similar lines, to tie it into Bjergsen, That's always one of the things I found so bizarre about the way Bjergsen was always contrasted with everyone else. So I get why you could make the mistake and think that Bjergsen is this god-tier assassin player. Because as I alluded to before, Season 3 Summer was just when the assassins were super overtuned in the meta. And so every European team would play those champions, fire them full of kills and resources, and then just let them roam around the map, killing everyone on the whole map and become unkillable in team fights. That doesn't mean that was the best way to play. That when you actually look at Bjergsen's career, I'd agree with Kelsey generally. If I think of Bjergsen, I think of Syndra, think of Orianna. I don't think, actually, it's funny that there was that famous stat where he actually had lost a lot of the DSM games when he played Zed. Yeah, no fucking wonder. It doesn't really fit his style. But he's just such a mechanically skilled player. If he wants to play that or play Fizz or something, I'm not sure he could do it. It's just, it doesn't fit his game as much. But what's funny is, I think, again, because people wanted to contrast him with Froggen, they tried to make him hit Bjergsen a player he wasn't actually. If you look at Bjergsen's career, that's the extreme version of it. What's funny is when you give that double lift anecdote there, the idea that he was so conservative that if he just got behind in lane, he was just going to let the other guy roam whenever he felt like it. That's just the extreme version. In the same way at the end of High's career, all the narratives became true because anything that didn't fit them just didn't exist in his game anymore. He wasn't as skilled anymore. He'd obviously had all those injuries. He was playing for worse teams. There's a million reasons as to why. So at the end of your game, career rather, obviously at that point in time, you're going to have a lot less of your strengths left. The point is, at this period in time, if you were Bjergsen, you could choose to do any style you wanted, play any champion you wanted. It's just, is that your absolute best approach? What I would suggest online, what you said, Kelsey, is when push comes to shove and he has pressure on him, that's why he reverts back to the mage every time. That's why he plays more of just the safe style. And he's not going to risk it in the same way as you would in a meaningless LCS game where you're just trying to style on the other guy and he's way worse than you. Well, if he's playing against Crown, he's going to respect that and say, right, how would I play to give myself the best chance of winning? It makes a lot of sense.
Also, it's something that we always say is that bad habits, you drill habits outside of stage so that, because what happens on stage is no matter how well you think you understand something or how well you think you can execute it, habits are basically going to come out, right? So I think also, again, that's a habit of Bjergsen. And the more pressure it is, the more layers of things he knows and can execute kind of fall away, right? So you see more and more of the quintessential Bjergsen there. And I'm not necessarily saying he's a bad assassin player or anything, but I do think that has, the reason why I brought it up is because I think that even if High had tried to just truly embrace what he was good at, I think that there was an appetite for, oh, this guy is coming in and wrecking everyone. Why doesn't everyone play like that? Where can we get more guys who can play like that? And so I think that's something that he also wasn't necessarily encouraged out of, right? Because he could play that style and just destroy everyone in LCS.
Midbeast, what do you think on this angle? Because I thought a way to frame this for you maybe is when you think of those really, really classic mages that are in the mid lane, and you notice, by the way, most of them endure throughout all of history, like the Synders or the Oriannas, they only go away briefly. They always come back because, obviously this term is so tainted in League of Legends, but they have utility that other champions do not have in the game. Their kits offer things to a team and a player that you just don't get from certain other champions that are more this specific ability is the one you're going to use all the time, or you've got to set up this ultimate all the time, right? When you have those kinds of champions, the thing I always find weird is, sure, our terminology is very limited, but it's they're not straight up carry champions in the sense people think of a mid lane. They're thinking of a Zed or something when they think of carry because they think just getting kills over and over again. And so in a sense, they can obviously be very good at shoring up a team. If you have a team that's weaker, that's one of the reasons I always tell people, you will always see Froggen if he's on the bad teams play those mages, not just because he likes them, but because that's actually, in his view, the best way to sort of patch up the leaky ship. It's if I play the control mage and I get my farm and I don't need the jungler 24/7 in my lane, that actually allows him to do something else. But at the same time, at some point in the game, they do have to carry. If they get all the resources, that's what they've. So how would you explain kind of the mage breakdown in that sense?
Those picks are just so consistent, man. You're always going to have a very consistent laning phase playing Syndra, Orianna. You're going to come into the mid game, 200 farm at 20 minutes or so. You're going to have the opportunity maybe in a team fight, hit a big ultimate, set up some utility, maybe get some Syndra stuns and stuff. It's just it's so straightforward and simple. And if you scrim a lot, you're always going to have consistent results with that. Maybe you're playing Assassins, you have a really pop-off game. Next game, you just can't get the lead. You can't do anything with it. Maybe your bot lane feeds. There's just nothing you can do with those type of picks. But if you pick Orianna, the Syndra, even like way back with the Lux, it's like there's going to be openings in team fights, even if your team's like a little bit far behind, where you can just get a double kill, a triple kill, and just turn the game on its head. But when you play those assassins, it's just there's just this lingering like thought in your head, like if I don't put the pressure on right now at my spike, like go for that solo kill, that risky roam or something. If I don't go for it now, it's just all done. It's like, I might as well just play Syndra, the Orianna, and stuff like that. So that's also why I think those type of champions just always come up. It's just they're just so simple. They're just so consistent, and you're just gonna get that like consistent 2-3 Ardent power spike where maybe you can turn the game or take over.
I also think like I do want to go back to the ping issue because it sounds like an excuse probably to most layman people, but they're just Akali combos that you can't really predict, or like certain outplays or trades that you can't do on more mechanical champions at higher ping. So if you're using the solo queue environment to practice mechanics, like you're going to be more likely to get like the mages down than to be able to show the higher level of mechanics on certain assassin picks. So I think that there's always going to be more of a tendency towards playing like Orianna, Syndra, etc. like that. That's reinforced by what your practice environment is like.
What ping do you play on Midbeast? Because usually Australians sometimes have bad ping, right?
I get 30 ping. It's fine.
Oh, that's pretty good
fine for me. But when I played in
definitely
NA,
better.
I had that 65, 70 ping, and that practice environment was just like compared to career where you're 10 ping, it's just disgusting. Like it's depressing knowing you can't do those Akali mechanics. You can't do a lot of mechanics with like Zed, Yasuo and stuff like that. The practice environment definitely influences them not to be able to pick those type of like Akali picks. Because as you said, like on stage, if you haven't practiced that many Akali games, that many combos, you see the opening and you just decide, I'm not going to go for it. I haven't done enough of those combos. I haven't practiced this enough. It's 50-50 or 60-40. I'm not going to take the risk. So I think definitely that practice environment is not helping those NA mids.
I'll even give you an analogy because, like, again, like the angle and like how you practice is going to literally shape the way your mind thinks when you go into the pro game. Like this is obviously when they actually had the server in LA or wherever it was closer to there. Like, yeah, in theory you could get, I think it was 30 ping, was it back then, Kelsey? Was it something along those lines?
I mean, it could be really, really low, like the closer you were to Riot Studios, right? Because obviously California is long, but I think it was like you could get close to 10 ping. So
because even though, listen, that means that yes, the pros at the time could play on a reasonable ping and they could play like in similar to what the other best regions would do. But the part that people don't think about is that means everyone who isn't a pro, doesn't live on the West Coast, wasn't getting good ping. Like if you lived in Chicago back then, you were fucked. You were the guy with 70 ping, maybe even 80 ping, depending on what the routing was like. And I can tell you, in the history of esports, that is an angle that I don't dismiss, actually. The fact that North Americans have often had to practice on inferior ping, like double, triple what Europeans did sometimes. Because in my native Counter-Strike, for example, one of the things about the way the Counter-Strike game works is it was actually invented originally as a game that would allow higher ping people to play. Games like Quake were the ones that benefited from having the super low ping. So in Counter-Strike, they basically made like sort of the simple version of say it is like a sort of net code prediction is built into the game where it sort of guesses, it sort of smooths out where you're aiming and it can guess a little bit ahead. And basically the weapon that helped the most was the sniper rifle, the AWP, which is a one-hit, one-kill weapon. And so what would happen would be when you would follow Counter-Strike back in the day, you would have tons of North American players in these online games, in their online leagues, who were AWPing all the time. And I would be thinking, like, this is crazy because, like, in European teams, you have one player who was the AWPer. And even then, if he's not really, really good, you don't have an AWPer because otherwise your AWPer just gets torn up by the other guy when you both have 10 ping. So what would happen is you'd have all these North American players who were using it because basically the netcode was allowing them to get more kills than they would otherwise. Then they would go to the big LAN, and at the big LAN, they would play these top European teams. And because now you're playing on, obviously, like in theory, zero ping, you're playing on the lowest possible, you would set up for a normal AWP shot and hold a normal angle. And whereas online, the guy who peeks into you with like an AK-47 there, he has like himself 60, 80, 90 ping, and he has to navigate trying to shoot you really long range. And you're going to get basically, let's say, an extra second or two to shoot him. Now you're on zero ping. So the guy who's a world-class rifle player from Europe with an AK, he steps out, you miss your shot, and he just kills you instantly. And then you're just thinking like, this isn't like even the game I've been practicing. Like there's no way basically in that moment, like you could do like one of those joke things like scratch the record, like, you're probably wondering how I got it. It's like, yeah, you fucked. Like, there's no way out of that. You have to go back home and retool your game, basically. So I don't think that is like a side topic, actually, Kelsey. That probably does play into how people practiced, how people even saw the role at the time. Like, if I can really just pick Orianna every time, and by the way, let's add in as well, Orianna in this era was famous for having no bad matchups. In theory, it was like the one that you could pick. Basically, unless you wanted to be Froggen and force your team to let you have last pick every game, you can just first pick Orianna's. Not that much can go wrong. Whereas there's another thing. If you want to pick the Zed, but then they get the counter pick, first of all, you either have to totally rechange your whole draft so you have the counter pick, or you have to play into something that potentially fucks you. Obviously, later on in the latter era, there's obviously champions that wreck that champion. So I don't think that's a small consideration. That probably is a factor. That it's just one of those ones that lurks in the background, you know. You're not going to think about it when someone locks it in and plays in the LCS match.
And obviously, we didn't have a ping change issue until end of season 5, I think. So even at this time, when I think season 4 mages were just generally good, but you had like Yasuo at Worlds, but you still had Orianna being like fucking broken at season 4 World Championship, right? So yeah, I think it was just more that the way that the like now I think ping is a really, really big thing, and you can look at retrospect and say that that was a huge part of how it evolved, because it definitely didn't deter a change after the meta changed.
Let me think. Who should we pick out now? Like, should we jump forwards in time and pick a big name? Is there anyone from this era that you wanted to highlight?
I think the only thing that we haven't really talked about is just the LMQ, right? Okay. That's like the only big shakeup, right? Because Xiao came over, and like he was basically kind of a sub mid laner on a low place Chinese team, and he played like I think it was a handful of games for LMQ, but he was just not considered good. Like the Chinese community.
She means in China specifically for LMQ. Yes, not obviously the one in Europe. Yeah.
Yeah, so he wasn't considered very good. And then they came over and they qualified pretty easily, and they were just stomping everyone for ages. And they probably would have continued to be good if there wasn't so much like actual weird, fucked up drama within the team. They probably would have continued to work. But I do think that other teams were catching up, and they were seeing more of like, okay, we need to trade more. We need to play more aggressively here. We need to take more of these skirmishes. So it was just really interesting to see like that development as well in terms of how mid lane was played, because obviously Xiao was all over the place on the map. He was roaming a lot, and he was able to still get like these massive lane leads. So
I remember him for having massive CS numbers. Like he would always consistently have massive CS numbers, but still be playing like hyper aggressive, moving across the map, being a part of team fights, not being passive. Like I remember watching him, like must have been Gragas, maybe Twisted Fate as well. He would just be like 200 farm at 20 minutes, but he still has that high impact in side lanes that a lot of other mid laners kind of struggle. Like if they're going to hit that 200 CS, like 20 minutes or so, like they're just sitting mid the whole time. They're not moving very much. They're being very selfish. But yeah, Zhao, yeah, he was a freak show when he came online.
He was definitely, I was just going to say, he was definitely one of the first ones who like actually roamed on the right wave, right? Instead of just dropping the wave, which became very, very popular for like mid laners like Pobelter would just give the wave, right? And then Xiao actually would just get the lead in the lane and then move to side and use the timing, like use the correct timing for roams.
Well, actually, on that angle, since you brought him up, let's reference now Pobelter then, because obviously the weird thing is Pobelter was around the entire time. For people who don't know, I think he was playing since he was something mental, like 15 years old. And the guy now, I think if you go and look, he's only like 22 or 23 now, something ridiculous. Like he's just one of those people who like in the game is a massive veteran, but is actually like in actual real life still a young person. So obviously he's a through thread that goes through the entire region, and basically until this, I mean, it looks like he's going to play this split for jungle, but let's ignore that. Until this year, was still an active player the whole time, and pretty much the whole time, at worst, a serviceable mid, if not at times, one of the better mids. Now, famously, I'm one of the people who basically, like, I think I was actually the first person who came up with that narrative, where the joke was, like, Pobelter is the best. The reason he's like your average mid laner is because he is just the most average mid laner. Like he would never throw the game for you. He's never going to pick something stupid and just feed and do something stupid. But also he's not the person where like a Bjergsen, these sorts of level of player that you would think would carry the whole game. So he was always for me a good player, but I never saw him in the same category. Like what do you remember, guys?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Like everyone brings up that one CLG final or whatever in 2016 or 2017. I can't remember which one, where he
2015.
was like smurfing. Yeah, where he was just like smurfing on Bjergsen or whatever, playing Yasuo, etc. But I think in general, if you look at Pobelter, it's strange because I think it was at 2019 Worlds or 2018 Worlds actually, where I made a video trying to defend him because I felt like he basically just gives waves to go to side. Like this is very, very consistent play that he does, is that he's willing to constantly give waves, but then if you skirmish for a dragon or play a dragon fight, he's going to be like a full level down. So at that point, it's even difficult to fully blame him for constantly losing mid lane if you like carefully watch the way that they were playing some of the games. But you could also make the counter argument that, especially since there wasn't ProView at that time, that he would lose trades anyway if he stayed, right? Or that he would mismanage the wave. And a lot of that wouldn't necessarily be discussed until more recently. But at the time, it was like, I really can't assess how good this guy is or not, outside of him obviously making some of his famous like mechanical errors in team fights, because he's never like level or on the same playing field as the other mid laner. So it was like pretty... He was definitely part of that mentality of, okay, I'm just going to sacrifice and I'm going to do so much for the team. And even in his twit longer, he uses that kind of as, oh, well, people don't really understand like what I'm doing. I'm actually just giving up so much and I'm making the rest of the team better. So I think that was like a big fault of Pobelter and a big fault of NA mid lane in general, just going back, like we started in the initial season 3, season 2 era. So that's kind of how I feel about Pobelter, is that he never really got to a point where he was pushing himself to actually lane trade or actually be a stronger mid laner. So that's like probably a lot on his own fault and a lot of how he was perceiving or how he was playing it or being told to play it.
Is the implication there, because obviously he played in some teams, like when he was in CLG and Team Look, he played in some teams where like either the AD carry was the star player or sometimes the top laner was a split pusher or something. Is the implication there that in NA, maybe that actually was the player that helped his team to be grouped up early or to be roaming with someone and it's worth giving up the CS and just against the top teams it was a deficit? Is that what you're implying?
I felt like he never developed as a mid laner because the mentality was always, I'm just going to sacrifice. So he never actually, it feels like watching him, he never actually learned the matchups properly or tried to like understand his own lane matchups that well, because he would just drop waves, go to a side lane, play that way. And it was like, okay, his excuse for not learning the matchups or not playing his lane properly is that I'm sacrificing for my team, right?
Do you think that was a confidence issue? Like maybe he wasn't confident enough that he could actually push his lane and like dominate it. I feel like a lot of the times he could have maybe pushed for like leads in his lane, but he just opts for the roam, gets someone like double lift or someone ahead, and then it's just the game is over anyway. And you don't really need to push that advantage to steamroll it. But yeah, I'm not sure what happened with like what is happening with Pobelter as a player. Maybe he just wants that style where it's not the whole game's not on him. He doesn't want the pressure or something like that. But you know, he's put pop off games every now and then. But yeah, definitely not the standout superstar of any team, to be honest.
Right. You know the great thing about this show. Sorry, do you have another point on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe at the beginning it was, well, Double Lift wants me to come bot right now, so I'm going to come bot right now. But over time, I think that kind of became his excuse. Maybe it's a confidence issue. I can't really say because I've never talked to him personally.
Okay. Right, being as this is our show and it is Narrative Wake, I can be as indulgent as I want. So it doesn't matter that this actually might be a brief tangent. It can be as brief as it needs to be, we'll see. But one player I would actually be remiss if I didn't bring up in this discussion before we move to another era is Shifter, who at the time was in Coast and then Dignitas. And the reason why I'm going to bring this player up is this is an example of where it looks like in history, I took a wrong turn. I bet the wrong horse because I famously said I thought he actually had the same talent level as a Bjergsen and he could be basically as good. And bear in mind, this was an NA player, wasn't an import. Now, what's funny is after watching his career since then, and actually he's one of those people where I follow like his YouTube and his streaming and I sometimes actually check in on some of his games that he plays on stream, which is quite rare for me. And I have to say, I don't actually think I made the wrong call there. Like, listen, the prediction itself did not come true. He did not turn out to have anywhere close to the career of Bjergsen. And most people, because they do judge you by career accomplishments, would say, like, he's a million miles away and one's a scrub and one's a Hall of Famer. But I will say, I don't think I was actually wrong on the talent level. Like, when I actually look at his games and when I watched him in this era, when he was on one of the better teams, and at one point in time, Dignitas was even number one in the LCS briefly during some of the weeks. I will say, for an NA player, it is sad to me that it's only the pole belters of the world that got to go through the threshold, and the man clouds fell away and the shifters fell, because there was talent. There actually were people who at times did look like very good players. And in his particular case, he would play majors and he would play the Nidalees of the world, or Ari, etc. Like he was also someone who showed a bit of depth. So I actually feel like that's like one of those like paths not taken, where the fact that someone like that was lost to the streaming world, I actually think is a shame.
Yeah, I think that's another underlying thing that you can bring up, is that I was going through and it's like, what did ever happen to all of those NA mids? And then it's like, oh, okay, Skara streams now, Shifter streams now. Like, there's a lot of undercurrent in that, where it was, I think, very early on in NA more lucrative and more interesting to have a fan base interact with the community, rather than just perfecting and grinding like almost single-mindedly at the game. And I think that that's also partly a cultural aspect of America, right? Where it's like, okay, I could get more money doing this and it's more comfortable. But I do think that like Shifter could be a case like that. But if you look at ManCloud and Shifter, both of their teams, like the last seasons they played, their teams like collapsed almost hilariously, like ridiculously horribly, right? And you kind of wonder if some of those like ridiculous roster changes weren't made, like Zuna fucking jungle, right? That you wonder if like maybe ManCloud could have had a career, right? Or if Shifter could have had a career if Dignitas wasn't the gigantic meme it was in the last season that they played.
I mean, on the topic of them switching to streamers, I'll even throw in, and people who watched the early Summoning Insight might think this is an outrageous comment that I would make, because I was very critical of this guy, but even Voyboy. Because if you remember, the problem was Voyboy switched from being a top laner to a mid laner, and obviously was like one game from going to Worlds by the end of the year that he'd swapped. So here's the thing, I was mainly critical of him at the beginning, because people took like the name Voyboy, and they're like, it's amazing, and then you watched him in game, and he was just a coin flip player. You know, he'd have games he popped off, he'd have games who was shit. But I will say, by the end, he actually was starting to get pretty decent. He wasn't as good as the people we're talking about now, like the best mids in the region. But he was someone where, again, he clearly had talent. If you go watch him now when he streams, he has mad mechanical skill. Like he has and by the way, has a very good eye for making crazy plays and stuff. In that sense, by the way, he is probably better suited to being a streamer. Like that's actually basically the MO of what you'd want from someone who can be a big name streamer, like good personality, funny guy, and then just goes for the outplay all the time. It's not always the best quality in a mid lane. If you look at a lot of the mid laners that endure, they are the boring mage players, because that guy, you'll always have a job if you can just get the CS and not lose lane. Like that, you'll always have a career if you can do that. Guess I've answered my own question as to why it's Paul Bell who made it through on that one. It's like the sort of Darwinian natural selection took care of that for me, didn't it? What about this then? Another player that I think is, again, shows how interesting the prism that you take the player through would be, if everyone thinks about Bjergsen, when I first heard, because I had a lot of inside connections with some of these teams, that Cloud9 was going to get, at the time, Incarnation, the infamous Incarnation. I remember, first of all, even saying, like, it's actually pretty obvious what Jack's done there. He's just literally looked and seen, right, we don't win the championship anymore, even though I've got a pretty good team, because they've got this Bjergsen motherfucker. How do I get my Bjergsen? And then he literally went and got like the only one who wasn't on a team, but who was a really skilled Danish mid laner who was in the world at the time, got him, brought him to NA. And what's funny is, I think people forget how underwhelmed they were when Jensen came into the LCS, because again, they all knew him from when he was banned, and he used to stream and play like Fizz and just literally like style on the whole map. What they didn't know was, and I think you've now seen it when you've followed his career, I did an interview when he first came to LCS. It was part of that series. I think it's on YouTube with Cloud9. It was called like Recall or something. So look like Thorin, Recall, Cloud9, Jensen or something. And Incarnation maybe back then. And in the interview, I actually asked him, because at the time people thought he was like a super assassin player and he wants to play aggro all the time. I asked him at the time what was the big water cooler topic, which is like Bjergsen or Froggen. And everyone thinks he's going to say, well, Bjergsen, of course, Froggen just doesn't roam and he's just too trying to farm, and Bjergsen's like a star player. And what he actually says is, like at the moment, I'd edge like Bjergsen is the better player, but I actually think in terms of their playing styles, I think Froggen's actually beats Bjergsen if they're of identical skill level. And if you look, the reason I always bring this little anecdote up is because if you look at their careers after that, again, what's this idea that Jensen's like this aggro assassin player? Listen, he plays Echo. That's about it. Like aside from that, this motherfucker loves a mage. I mean, the meme now is in season 9, it was like he was literally going through Froggen's trash from solo queue, looking for like, what picks is he using that he's thrown away? Like, is there anything in here I can use? It's like, he literally is in the weird wheelhouse of the mages. When I think of the best Jensen games, it's why I know that it's not really a pop-off position as much all during the laning phase in mid lane, because his way of shitting on people, I remember when I used to see like Mark Z and stuff saying like, he's shitting on all the mids, and I'd look it up, it's like, oh, you mean he's 20 CS up after laning? Like, that's good, yeah, you're right, that is an advantage, but that's not what we used to mean by shitting on people. Like, shitting on people meant you solo killed them 3 times, so like Jensen's obviously a great character we can bring up, and again, one, as I say, where there's more depth there than people realise. It's not as simple. Some of these like very broad outlines that are painted, they only work for one period of time. And as you've noticed, I think this is a common trend. With the mid lane, you have to talk about what the meta is as well. It's not like they just play the champion they like. They play the champion that they think fits them in the meta. So if you put assassins there, some of these guys are going to look godlike. But if you make the mages the strongest and he can play Syndra or something like that, he's going to be on Syndra Orianna himself all the time. This guy loves it to pick one of those. This must be your wheelhouse. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because the big thing to remember is Cloud9 in 2015 spring was second place. And then when Jensen first comes in summer, you have their last place for a little while, right? But then you literally have High coming back in to play fucking jungle so that they can minimum make 7th place, right? And then they make Worlds at the end of the season. So the retrospective on Jensen is still that, oh, he was always good. So it's like really easy to forget that his first season was really shit.
Yeah.
And
he flopped very hard.
Yeah. So
why was that, do you think?
I mean, when people compare like straight out of solo queue rookies to, it's like, why can't we take straight out of solo queue rookies? Like, I think that's when you started to feel the pain points of like not playing a secondary league or not having played amateur, because he didn't really, right? He was banned, competitively banned for ages.
Oh, yeah.
So he didn't
very toxic
really
player.
So he didn't really have, or I guess there's debate as to whether or not he actually did DDoS people, but the question is, it's like you start to feel not having an amateur scene, not having anything that prepares you for when you get to LCS. And that's when I think it starts to show in NA a little bit, and why you start to see the gap between like Challenger Series and LCS start to form a little bit in terms of like complete rookie players and already fully formed players, and where some of the risks on rookies started to go away as well. So just I think him not having like a competitive foundation, he literally didn't understand like any of the nuances of competitive play, other than, oh, in solo queue, like I can shit on this. Like I used to play versus NateDOhDoubleG in 1v1s, and NateDOhDoubleG was like a very cheesy player in season 3 as well. So it's really interesting to kind of like look at that in retrospect and say, yeah, that's when rookies started being hard to bring into LCS.
I mean, I can speculate a little bit based on things I got from interviews and talking to some of these players over the years. Like, one of the other angles you have to throw in as well is these guys aren't just playing like 1v1. Obviously, there's the rest of the map, and most essentially, as every jungler in the world, every mid laner in the world knows, there's the jungler, and the jungler definitely impacts it. So one of the interesting things is, I remember one of the funniest things about when Cloud9 first came along with that amazing original lineup is everyone did what they always do, which is because they almost never lost a game. Oh, they're all just the best player at their position and they're all just superstar players. And the people used to even try and imply it was like an all-star team or something. Even though I think if you just look at their careers, some of them definitely overperformed for what I expected, but I think it showed that most of them were role players and they just had a brilliant synergy. And then a couple of them were among the best in their roles at different periods of time. But the angle I'm coming to here is it's only when High left the game and Incarnation came in, I actually realized that Meteos had, I wouldn't even necessarily say flaws, but like a very rigid style of play himself. Because one of the things that High did is allow Meteos to never have to like chain gank his lane. He basically allowed Meteos, obviously initially famously, to just farm up like a motherfucker. And then after that, even when he then shifted to the Jarvans of the world, it's more like at that time, Meteos could play like a solo queue jungler. He could be like, right, I'll choose the lane I go to. And it doesn't matter how much, the bot lane's pinging me. If the top lane's the lane to gank to get ahead, I'm going to gank the top lane. And he would play like that. The difference is when Incarnation Jensen came in, he really wanted like the comfort of like, if I ever don't have a ward, then my jungler needs to be in the brush. It's like, dude, that's not going to happen in LCS. Like this is a different world. Like in solo queue, maybe your jungler does that because he knows this is free LP. This guy's going to stomp the lane if he gets this champion ahead. In an actual pro game, first of all, that's not that common that the jungler will do that. But even more so, if you've gotten to know the personality of Meteos, he's this type of person where if you want to get him to do what you want, you have to let him think it's his idea and come up with it himself. If you want to tell him to do what you want all the time, you're in for a bad time. Like, I could just say, go and look at the teams he was on, and it's never being kicked from any of these teams because he's not a good player. He's being kicked because just for whatever reason, he didn't have the right sync up with certain players in terms of how he wanted to play, how they wanted to play, and certainly sometimes how to communicate. So I'd say that was probably a factor. Like, basically, if I look back now, you almost gave Jensen the worst jungler for him specifically. You'd probably want him to be something in the vein of like whatever fucking Rainover did or something, where they just play to the lanes all the time and give you what you want. I don't think that's the right type of jungler. And then I'd also throw in as well, like Jensen was the kind of player where he definitely didn't, this might sound weird, but because he came in with this really unusual rookie hype, like obviously everyone wanted to see him play and everyone thought he was banned forever and he's never going to get to play. And so he'd almost become an Abdul like myth of like, but imagine if he'd have played, he'd have torn them all up and beaten them up. But so then when he had to actually come in and do it, the pressure on him was immense. And he's not just coming into he's not just coming into his region. It's not like he played the the Challenger Tour and then came to... No, he came straight into the LCS in NA for one of the biggest teams in a team that's been to Worlds, and as Kelsey says, was in every final. Like, the pressure on you at that point in time, that's like some number one draft pick level shit in like a pro sport where the fans like basically expect you to win the championship year one or they start calling you a bust. So I also think from talking to him, it wasn't even that he couldn't have played out some of these lanes. It's that he went into them like, I'm not going to let myself ever die in some of these scenarios. I'm not going to ever put myself in a situation where I die for this teammate or risk something. And obviously, like, one component of being a mid laner is sometimes you have to give up something to gain something in return. You can't just turtle. You can't just sit under your tower. However, people might try to claim certain players do that.
It would have been so frustrating for him, though, to come onto a team with Meteos, someone who's not really like lane heavy for the mid lane, and he had all this immense pressure to come in and perform, and then he doesn't get someone to set up the vision, set up the ganks. It would have been super frustrating. I don't know how he would have dealt with it internally, because there would have been so much hype and pressure for him to kind of get solo kills, get the roams, get massive leads. But then simply, I think he just slowly realized like that's in pro play, that's literally impossible unless you have that perfect synergy with your jungler to set it all up. Because mid lane essentially is a 2v2. It's the 1v1 is a lot. Like, people like to hype up the 1v1s, but the jungle and the support in these days more so it's control the mid lane. That's the most important thing. So yeah, it would have been really frustrating for him to come onto that team to begin with. Holy shit.
I'll even throw in, this is another factor that people forget about why the role swapping High back into the active lineup as a jungler worked. If anyone remembers when they played that gauntlet, High was a terrible jungler. He didn't play any of the fucking champions. Like, he was trying to play shit from season 2, like Shyvana jungle in season 5 going towards Worlds. Like, there's no world that he was ever going to be a good jungler. Like, he had the instincts for the game, but the role he was trash at. But like, there's a player again, a sacrificing player, like a guy who will play for the lane. So as a result, that's why I think he made that famous line that he said, where he said, like, you know, if you carry me through the gauntlet, I'll carry you to Worlds or whatever, like some shit like that, where there was like some epic line they said. The notion was, High basically came in and his job was, he was like the Jensen whisperer. He was just there to be like, it's all right, Jensen, it's going to go good. I'm going to be there at level. Yeah. Exactly, like, and then at that point in time, the guy did take off. Then he was a fucking sick mid laner.
So I think one thing to talk about is specifically, like, there's a difference between getting a lane lead and knowing how to win with your champion. And that was something that, like, because Jensen actually didn't do too badly in lane, but he didn't, if you gave him TF, he didn't understand, like, where to port, or he didn't have instincts for, like, closing the game that are, I think, a little bit harder to instill in rookies. So I think that was a bigger thing also, is it wasn't necessarily that they were getting like monster 2v2 destroyed. It was that, like, it didn't feel like there was an identity on the map for the team, and he wasn't playing those champions well. And he actually said that, like, playing with High, he learned how to play out the map better, right? Specifically from High on like those types of champions. And I think that you get into solo queue, you just smash your lane and the game kind of ends sometimes. Yeah. Or so you don't necessarily get to practice like these levels of win conditions. And I think that that's like one of the bigger things that separates. It's like, oh, I'm ahead, play to my lane. Like, let's be aggressive here. Is that he's maybe not even that kind of player. Like, when I see him, I don't necessarily see him as a player who's like, all right, I'm super far ahead. We're going to constantly like play to side lane now. And we're going to constantly snowball the game like through 2v2s inside and then move mid, help him get mid prio, like take over the map, get vision here. Like, even when I see him play now, I don't even think of Jensen as a selfish player. Like, it's really weird. And I think part of that, like what you guys were talking about with the jungle, is why he's been characterized as a selfish player who doesn't roam. Because even if you contrast him with Bjergsen, right, they're not that dissimilar. Because this idea was that like Bjergsen roamed and Jensen just played for lane. But I think that part of that came from like the contrast between Bjergsen and his junglers as a duo versus whereas his junglers moved over the map in his place, and Jensen and Meteos as a duo, right? A lot of that stark contrast came from that. And I think that they're actually kind of pretty similar players in a lot of ways, just in terms of how they've evolved as NA mid laners. And that experience of learning his champions, learning out how to play the map, is something that he evolved at that time. But if you look at how he's played lane, it actually hasn't changed too significantly.
Actually, what do you must have some thoughts, Midbeast, on the topics you brought up there, the premise of like the difference between just like getting kills on a champion, getting a champion farmed, and actually knowing basically what can this champion do and how to use it. Because that's one of the things, to tie into my intro again, that made me so fascinated when I first found about Abdo, is that it wasn't that he just played the game and then just stomped everyone like Incarnation would have on Fizz or something. It's that when he would play, and obviously the most famous example was his TF, he would take whatever little lead he had and just use it all over the map and basically close the game as fast as possible. Like, you can see why the guy was a booster. It's like he was trying to just speed run the game, and he was super effective at it, right?
Exactly. But Abdo's whole thing was kind of like risk versus reward. Like, he would never take super risky plays. He'd take small leads, any small thing that he could take without like a high risk, and he would just be impossible to kind of put behind. Like, there's no opportunity to set him behind after he started steamrolling, getting those small leads, making those picks. That's just why he was the best, or is the best solo queue player. It's just because he's so consistent, probably more consistent than any other player. There's no opportunity to punish him in the laning phase. And he's not a risky player as someone like Caps or Rookie and stuff like that. He's the complete contrast. So yeah, I don't know.
How does that tie? How does the premise of that tie into like competitive play?
Completely different. Solo queue, like that type of style, and competitive play is completely different. The win condition of those champions are different. You played something like a Zed, you're not going to make the same picks in competitive play as in solo queue. Like, it's so different playing assassins in competitive compared to solo queue, because it's not going to be random people caught off in the side lane. You can't play Twisted Fate. It's very hard to play Twisted Fate in competitive because everyone's talking the whole time, saying, hey, Twisted Fate ultimates on this cooldown. Exactly. Care bot lane, care top lane. But in solo queue, it's just, pretty much 5 monkeys running around, hardly communicating. That's why those type of picks are so good. And that's why people like Dopa is so good, just because he's really consistent at that style. But that's the kind of thing that a lot of people say, like, imagine if Dopa went to solo queue, imagine if he went to
pro play,
pro play. But at the end of the day, I'm one of his like biggest fans, but I don't think he would have or will do as good as a lot of people hype him up to do in that competitive environment, just because he excels at that specific style. That's not really the same as pro play. It's completely different.
Okay, you've now just been banned from LS's chat, but you know that message just the notification just flashed up.
I agree with you, but that's very contrary to like Dopa's public perception, right? Sure. Is that I agree. Like, I think he's basically a Kassadin Orianna TF player, something along those lines.
Oh, by the way, though, to tie that in, though, like, I'm sure from personal experience, Midbeast, when you were playing in the OPL, right, when I joked before that you were in some of the worst teams, etc., that's just in terms of the results. Like, I've no doubt there was mid laners that you were playing in competitive that in solo queue you tear this guy up. Like, if it's just you versus him and you have reasonable picks, you probably wreck this guy. But in actual pro games, when he's on with his real team that are players he's played with maybe for a year and they've got real comms, like, it becomes way harder to, like, that's why that whole, like, I notice it comes from American sports culture, unfortunately, where basically what they do is they take the concept of being aggressive and because it's like they make it macho, right? They make it about like, bro, are you like a fucking pussy? Like, just make a play, bro. Make a play. It's like step up to the plate. All these like weird fucking like euphemisms, you know. Whereas it's like sometimes in the game you have to take what the game gives you. You know, you can't just like, as you're saying, you can't just like first pick TF and just be like, that's all right. I'll probably just do like I do in solo queue.
It's impossible. That's the whole thing about, like, I swear there's a lot of like high talented mid laners that if you would put them maybe on a better team with a better jungler or something, they would have been the stars instead. I think if you're on a team that doesn't, a jungler or a team environment that doesn't support you, there's just no, you can't just run down mid and just solo kill someone, especially these days where everyone knows exactly how to lane kill, like play their laning phase. There's just not the openings. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a tough spot to be on if you're individually equal or better to like as your opponent, but your team, like, or your jungler is below, it's just, you can't make up that difference. It's impossible to do on an individual scale. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. I've definitely been there on like Oceanic teams for sure, where it's, I know I'm better than them, but I don't have the vision to make the play. I don't have the jungle pry, the scuttle pry, something like that. It's just impossible to go. It's too high risk of a play, so you can't really make it at all.
I'll even throw in as well. This is why I always think it's whack that we all, to this day, this is why American sports culture is unfortunately tainted, because they try to sell to the lowest common denominator. So every NFL discussion I ever listen to is just about like, they talk like it's a 1v1 game between the quarterbacks. Like they ignore there's like 53 people on every team and stuff, and that they don't even ever play against each other directly on the field. So they do the same in League. They talk like when Bjergsen and Froggen play, it's just them two playing in fucking Howling Abyss or some shit, and they've picked the best champion for them. Like, the part they ignore, it's a point I tried to make on a certain infamous episode of Listen Local, but they just refuse to let me ever make this point, is, right, the analogy is like this. If you were a basketball player, right, and you were the best player on your team, and you're like the shooting guard, for example, like a player that gets to take shots a lot, right, if your teammates really are hot trash, you're sometimes going to shoot a shot, even if the defender's playing you perfectly, because your logic goes like this. I've got a better chance of making this shot defended well than passing to this bum who's just going to miss the shot. Like, why would I give him the shot? Because you know what? I've learned this from experience. I've given him the chances before. I've tried to set him up. I've tried to be a distraction and let him do it and try to do the equivalent of high type shit, make him the star of the show, and then he misses. Well, in that scenario, what I tried to explain to them is, I don't really know what Froggen would do if he was on like TSM with a bunch of good players. Maybe he would play the style that he does now, and I'd be wrong. I suspect sometimes he would play more aggressive and he would play the Talons of the world, etc. It's just that in his analogy, it's like, how can I do certain plays that require not only follow-up from the jungler and other players, but I have to trust them. I have to believe they're going to do that. And if I've scrimmed with these guys and I know they're not, there's almost no point doing that. Like, at that point in time, it's all well and good, like, saying to believe in people, but it has to come from somewhere. It's found, you know, you have to prepare, you have to believe in, have confidence in what you've seen from them. You can't just believe. It's not some religious shit where if you believe it, he will do the gank. Like, no, he won't. Like, it's contracts, you know.
Oh, come on.
Froggen has definitely been in that spot where I feel like he doesn't have the trust in his team, for sure.
All right,
you can
so
see default back to those picks.
Yeah, I think there's like a combination of things. Like, so it's weird like Froggen's champion. Like we don't have to make this a Froggen discussion unless we want.
I mean, he's going to come in a
NA
discussion at some point
right?
soon. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I do think it's like his champion pool is really strange in terms of like lane priority. And I don't know what the reasoning for it is, but it's like it's almost like difficult to 2v2 around his lane because of the champion pool he plays. And I don't know where that comes from, because I would say that Contrax is a jungler who likes to 2v2 a lot. So yeah, I'm not really sure like what happened with that, like where's if it's a chicken or egg scenario, because Froggen is definitely a player who like his champion pool doesn't, like the Karthus and all that crap that he came out with doesn't really lend itself to like let's skirmish mid jungle. And I don't know if it's like, I don't know what causes it, because I would say that like Contrax isn't a jungler who's going to like fuck up the 2v2, right? Like you can say what you want, but if you tell like him, okay, we're going to come here and we're going to fight and we're going to skirmish here, like I don't think he's going to fuck that up at least. So I'm not really sure exactly where the like why they ended up playing that way, like what his logic or what his reasoning was, if it was just like he auto doesn't trust the rest of his team in the situation he's in, or
that's what I feel like he just auto doesn't trust his team sometimes. It's yeah, he could go for a play, it's kind of risky, but he's like, no, someone's gonna fuck this up, I'm out, I'm just gonna play it safe, get the farm. In a team fight where it's more controlled, I'll go for the play, which kind of like it's not a bad, it's not a bad thing, but I don't know, I'd love to see Froggen come up with like a more involved 2v2 style, looking for more risky type of stuff. But I mean, that his play style is already cemented. I feel like he's not going to change it.
No, that's why actually the issue I have in that particular sense is like, again, you kind of nailed it there, Kelsey. It basically depends philosophically where you start, and then we're all analysing the same data. But the problem is this, because I look at the teams he's been on recently, like you're saying Contract is competent in this regard. I'm a little bit more 50-50 on that one. Sometimes he is, sometimes he absolutely will betray you and let you down and fuck the whole game up. So I don't know entirely about that. I'll just say the last 3 or 4 teams Froggen was on, the jungler for me was usually one of the weaker players on the team. And so I'll just put it from this perspective. If you knew, again, we're taking my initial premise as an assumption for this argument. If you knew your jungler is probably going to fuck stuff up and he actually might even be a weak point in the game, then if you actually then look at the picks that Froggen does and cultivates, and sometimes has off-meta picks no one else is using, it's amazing how rarely he ever gets wrecked in the lane. How rarely, if the game gets to the point of a team fight, he is of no use whatsoever. Like his strategy, like Midbeast is saying here, in a weird, almost unorthodox manner, it does have a level of success to it, and certainly to the degree that you wouldn't just abandon it. The problem is, as you're saying, is like, would it have worked if he'd have embraced a totally different mindset? Or in this particular case, I mean, I realize on my scenario, mine's not falsifiable, so I don't make it as an argument. But if he had a better jungler, what would then be the case? Now, that's also unfortunately a waste of time as a discussion, because if you look at his career path, he has basically chosen, it's like this guy did study American sports or something, because he understands, unless you're the absolute best player, if you just want to make the most money, what you do is play for worse teams who will overpay you to be their star player. That is the best way to make loads of money without being the absolute best player. That's why, if you notice, my whole argument, which again, they missed the whole point on Listen Local, because they just heard the words Froggen, and then they heard the words Cloud9, and they spiraled, they didn't listen to what I was saying, was that the reason why on Cloud9 I thought they would have won the LCS is not because Froggen would have carried the game, of course he wouldn't. It's that if he'd have just played Froggen mid lane, and then all of a sudden you have all these picks for everyone else, and now you can have Licorice be the star player, you can have whatever you want in the game pretty much. That's, in my opinion, would have just shored up the team. It would have just made you an overall better squad. It's not that he's better than even Niski, that's irrelevant. They're not mid laners in that sense, they're playing an overall team game. So,
yeah, I mean, I think Froggen is a good example of like pivoting back kind of to the main topic though, is Froggen is a good example using that characterization of him of a lot of the mids that have come over to North America and they've played the way that they did in Europe or Korea or whatever and not evolved a lot as a player and just kind of stuck to that style of play. And I don't think this is just like mids that have come over. It's just that because Pro Belter is like that too, right? But it's just that we're predominantly import mids now. So
yeah, of course.
Obviously it's like people will come over and they'll say, okay, this worked for us, but it doesn't necessarily work now, and there's not necessarily resources that help these players evolve. There's not like a safety net or a sense of like good security within team environments that I think allow these players to evolve very fully. So you see players like making the same decisions. And also, like, again, you can go to the solo queue environment. Like there isn't a lot of limit pushing or a lot of people showing like how to play out matchups on new champions that come out and how to really push the limits of these champions. So you don't get as much out of practicing and learning those champions as you do like playing champions that you know you can outplay everyone on already. So I think there's like a lot less, at least domestically, there's a lot less reward for risks that you can take to kind of push your limits and try new things compared to, okay, I know I can win on this, right?
Right. What about, before we get to some of the more recent people, are there any people in like the middle period that we should reference? Like obviously some of the infamous imports like GBM, or recently even Ryu the last couple of years. There's some names you can throw in there. So is there anyone from this bag that people want to pick out and talk about?
Not really for me, honestly. I'm not sure really what happened with Ryu. He seemed to... What team did he first come on to?
100 Thieves? Oh no, he came onto the Phoenix One.
Phoenix One,
man.
right.
Phoenix One was hilarious.
I feel like Ryu definitely just never hit the spot for me. Just never kind of the guy to look to. Always like middle of the pack. I don't think I've ever considered him top 3. And now I don't know what he's doing, to be honest, but yeah. Who was the other, sorry?
GBM.
GBM.
I didn't follow that too much. I know there's a lot of hype around it, but he had a lot of weird picks, right?
Yes, he famously had the Zillion one where,
That's
or whatever it was, something like that.
That's it.
GBM is an interesting one because I think when he was picked up by Energy, he was like legit hard stuck Diamond 3 or something in Korea. And they just picked him up because he was Korean and he had like a lot of reputation from playing some of LCK, right?
Yes.
So I think that's a really funny story about just like the automatic import bias as well that started to pop up around that time. And I think that like that's undeniably definitely there, right? You can't look at certain players like the top laner for Winter Fox, whatever his name was, and say that wasn't there because that was
Avalon, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, Avalon, because that was definitely there. And there was a certain amount of like laziness in scouting for sure that started to become really, really apparent. You had players like Keen, who was basically like Keen played in Oceania, right?
Yeah, he was Oceania maybe really early on, just as I was starting, but then he went over to NA pretty quickly. But I feel like he had a pretty good run in NA.
He did, but it was like in a very specific style though, right? Because he was famous for being like, like the first time he would play an off-meta pick, he would always pop off. He'd like win the game with it. But then the point is, it wasn't that he was like the best mid. So when that then got solved or other people picked up that matchup or learned the matchup, then he'd have to go to something else. He was a bit of a gimmicky player. But I'll give credit. Like that worked sometimes, certainly.
100%.
I remember the famous anti-carry.
There we go.
He plays Urgot every day.
The old Urgot, obviously, we're talking about, not the rework, if people don't remember. It was the whole premise was like, when you played it, you were like, what the fuck is this shit? This isn't even mid lane. And he was like, yes, that's the point. I'll say actually a little bit on the GBM topic, because I can give you a little bit of info there, which is, he's an example. It's funny because him and another player from his team both were imports and they both failed because his jungler was a player called Closer. Now, what's interesting about both of these guys is they both failed in the same way, which is the storyline was this. And by the way, as people listen to this storyline, even fans only of the modern day are going to hear some themes that they're going to think, that sounds familiar. So they both played for a Jin Air team that was like surprisingly better than they should have been, but they weren't a top team. Like they weren't going to go to Worlds or anything. And what they used to do, are you ready, guys? This is going to blow your mind. They used to play really late game where they would like not get any kills, but then draw the game out as long as possible. And then bizarrely beat you in these like weird super late games that you were like, I've never even been in a fucking scrim like this. What is this shit? Like, and they would somehow win some of these games. And the problem is, first of all, when that type of style exists, it reminds me of the classic thing that I always said about CLG EU when Froggen used to play for them. Because again, believe it or not, people used to try and tell me they were Europe's best players as well. And I would say that, well, the reason you know they aren't is because all these games are going late game. Like, anyone who's good at League of Legends, if they're better than their opponents, wants to end the game earlier. You don't, like, it's not fucking, like, even Muhammad Ali in the famous rope-a-dope fight, the whole point is he couldn't beat the guy early. He had to make him wear himself out. Like, he wasn't actually a better boxer than that guy. He had to wear the guy out, and at the end, in the same scenario, beat him when the guy was in a situation he'd never been in, where he's just totally gassed. So in the same sense, like, nobody's choosing to have a 50-minute game. You have a 50-minute game because your plan to win at 25 minutes went fucking wrong 4 times, and then you just barely survived and kept your head above water. So the Jin Air team, first of all, were overrated because they had the wins in the server. But if you looked at the style, they clearly weren't a top team. And then the problem was the 2 best players clearly were this jungler Closer and the mid laner GBM. And these 2 guys, through their career in Korea and then going import, taught me a really valuable lesson about League of Legends and esports in general, which is because a fan will dismiss anyone who's not on a top team and say, well, they couldn't possibly be a top player because look, their team didn't win. It makes experts go the other way too far. And what we do is we all look for the genius thinking man's pick. Like, I actually think the best jungler in the world is Closer from Jin Air, because look what he's working with. He's got nothing, and yet, you know, he's drawing these games. And what you don't realize is this. Yes, an unusual thing, he's doing something that other people couldn't do. But that doesn't mean, and this is the key point, that doesn't mean that if you put him into SK Telecom, he'd be the best jungler. Because maybe when he actually had the weapons and he did have the right teammates and he was put in all those positions that he couldn't even get to sometimes in another team, maybe he wouldn't be able to do it. Maybe that's all he had was what you saw.
And obviously you're talking about Chaser and not Closer.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I keep
to clarify, because people in the comments are going to be like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
That's true. I did just delete that guy's name. It was Chaser. Yes,
it was Chaser. Yeah. But I think it's pretty interesting, like that team in general, the Energy team he joined, because since they're like dead and no longer in the LCS, obviously they have some teams that are unrelated now in other esports and not the same management. But like at the time, I had multiple sources confirm to me that they made roster decisions based on Twitter followers and branding reach. So it was really interesting, just like the lack of scouting that kind of went into that team and how they came out in summer compared to spring, which I think spring, like they had some talents that people thought, okay, this could be interesting, or couldn't work out. And there's like a level of like a lot of internal drama, to my understanding, that fucked up. But it's really interesting to look at that team as a pretty big example of a lot of things that people now say are wrong with NA, right? It's like lack of due diligence and scouting, just bringing in like random imports. And this isn't true of every team now, but it was definitely true of that team then. So it's like Energy is a really weird one.
I'll even throw in as well, like one of the people who built the reputation of GBM as one of the best mids was Monty when he used to be a caster, because like to him he liked that unusual style of play and stuff. But I'll even say he actually himself, when GBM came to NA, told me, I can't remember if it was on a show or privately, but he basically did predict like this is going to be terrible, because what he said was like they've recruited this guy. It's like they just heard, oh, he's a star player, and thought, right, stack him on a team with a bunch of other good names and then we'll just win this motherfucking league. And it's like, that's not the way League ever worked as a game. Like, you always need complementary players who fit together. And so Monty, I remember, even said, like, yeah, but the problem is you haven't recruited the right sort of jungler to work with GBM. Like, that's not, like the sort of players you have aren't going to work at all. Like, where's the, like, famously on that team, it was the one where, I'm trying to remember all the players. I think that was the one that wasn't Alltech, the AD carry. I think they used to basically have like, I know they had
Alltech and Moon.
I know at one point in time they played like a comp where it was like the only Altec was the fucking damage source in the entire map. So like, as you can see, basically, whether these players, as far as I can tell, most of them individually were decent. It's just they didn't, like, basically it was a terribly put together roster. Like, whoever made the roster didn't understand concepts like what type of a jungler goes with what type of a mid laner goes with what type of a top. They didn't get these premises basically, and everything was kind of like disjointed. Just to corroborate your story on that one.
Yeah,
that's the most important bit, though. That synergy. You need that team synergy. Otherwise, you just don't have a team. But teams, I feel like now are starting to get the hang of it. Starting to do like little boot camps, little trials and stuff. I feel like everyone now has got the gist of that, but maybe back then. Do you reckon? I still like people knew back then, but they just want to throw something together. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's still some lazy roster decisions, and I think a lot of that is just based off of the fact that there
Any
isn't
examples?
like a big amateur scene right now. I'm not going to name any specific names right now, but
Okay.
I think that a lot of the lazy scouting is it is based off of the fact that there isn't a lot of amateur scene, and the players willing to come to NA from other regions has decreased now that you have like EU in the final, China in the final, like more of an even playing field. People feel like really, really competitive mids, and other regions feel like they don't want to cash out, right? They don't want to come to NA because they still have a career. Like as sad as that is to say. So I think that part of that is just people feel like there's a lack of like available options. So they're willing to kind of go for maybe like disregarding synergy a bit, like the super team option where it's like, what's the best pick we can get in this role? Okay, let's go down the line. What's the best pick we can get in this role? What's the best, like across according to that? I also think casters and commentators still have a lot of power,
Of course.
in roster making. Like people don't necessarily realize this, but casters and commentators, just like the hype on Twitter and Reddit, like obviously branding is always going to be a big part of any competitive game because it's entertainment, right? So if a caster is hyping up a player, then you might be willing to take a chance on that player, more likely to take that player than someone who actually might be better for your team just because of the branding value they're bringing and the hype that the community will generate. So it's a really interesting process. Yeah.
I'll even give you another angle, another way that because one of the main problems basically here is that one of the transitions that League still hasn't been able to fully make in terms of the pro scene is originally all the moves were made by the players who are in the team now. The current starting roster decides who joins and who leaves. So they kick someone out based on their own decisions. And then without having like traditional sports where you'd have a general manager, which we're sort of now getting, where it's his job to plan out the roster and decide, it's on his head. Then what happened is the owners started doing it. And then when the owners did it, they're the ones, as Kelsey's saying here, who listen to the Reddit hype. Even worse, they'll go off things like, they'll ask one of their players, like, oh, what was he like when he played with them in solo queue? And it's like, why is that fucking relevant? Like, we're not playing solo queue now. Like, we had a different bot lane or whatever. Like, so again, if they say, oh, the guy's a monster, he's sick or whatever, that player himself isn't necessarily thinking of what it would be like in a real match with that guy. Well, I'll give you an example right now. I'll pick one that's fairly recent, which is, I don't know if you remember, but I think it was at the beginning of last year, season 9, I think that's when it was. Season 9 spring, the Clutch gaming lineup they made was where they had Huni in the top lane and Piglet AD carry. So first of all, they're acting like mid lane can be the weakest role. That is mental to me because at no point in League history, as far as I know, has mid lane ever been the weakest role. But even worse than that, you've picked 2 Korean players whose whole mentality is I am going forwards the whole time, and it's like either I'm going to go through the guy in my lane or I'm going to feed my lane. And so what you've done to your jungler there is just say, welcome to hell. Like it's like Saw. It's like, would you like to play a game? It's like, guess what? You lose no matter what. Like if you go Hooney's area all the time, now Piglet's feeling like a motherfucker. He's pushed up getting ganked all day long. If you go bot lane half the time, now what the fuck's Hooney doing? It's like, at this point in time, it's like you're trying to save 2 drowning people. Like you have to pick one. Like it's ridiculous. So that's an example of a team where I still to this day think both of those players were absolutely functional LCS players, but you needed a team that complemented them. And they're good examples because they're both famously such extreme examples of players. They're not kind of ones that ever had to have like a plan B or I don't think they even know, like they still think of League the way they think of League the whole time as far as I can tell.
And then you've got, it's Huni, right? It's Huni and Froggen on the same team this year?
Yes.
Roster? That's going to be super interesting to see how that goes. I'm excited. But it's like they've spent everything on top and mid. I can't remember. I have no idea who the rest of the roster is, but I know it's not that noteworthy. But it'll be interesting to see what they can do.
Afro.
Okay, yeah.
And then jungle is Greg.
Okay, yeah. No, that'll be interesting to see how that goes.
That's definitely going to be a fun one.
I guess Froggen kind of complements Huni because he can kind of like play that play style in the mid lane. He's always going to have that perfect farm, Froggen never ints. He always has that really consistent style.
Now the jungler's free to go top, which he will have to do. So problem solved.
Yeah, that'll be super interesting.
But I also there's going to be, because if Froggen has a similar champion pool, there's also going to be like probably free mid prio, and so 3 mans on Hooney's land every game. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I think it'll be interesting to watch for sure.
This split will be fun.
Right, what about who else should we pick out? Who, if we could even go forwards in time, who's some other mids that we should start talking about now?
So mids now, or mids like
in the last couple of basically after we were talking about in this period, like we've talked about the GBM, like that coming into the Ryu period. Who else is a mid from around this era going forwards?
I think it's fair to characterize it as like early NA mids, like the entrance of some of the imports, and then lazy scouting is like the periods we've gone through so far. Let's see.
What about upcoming NA mids, like Damonte?
Oh yeah, we can talk about.
Let's do him. Yeah, he's played a couple of years.
Yeah, let's talk about Damonte then.
Well, put it this way, his class, I think we can put a couple of people here. Like, it's basically, after Poor Belter, the people who joined him was Damonte and Golden Glue. They're the people who keep getting the chances, keep being on different teams, at times have shown some serviceable play. I don't think they've ever quite risen to the levels, people hope they would, but whatever. They're from NA, what do you expect? Like, give them a fucking break. So, what about, you start us off, Midbeast. What do you think of Damonte as a player?
I think he has talent, man. I think definitely maybe 2-3 years down the track, he could be, in that top pool of like 2-3 mids, like top 2-3. But I just don't think he has what it takes maybe for this year or maybe even the next. It's gonna take him a while to develop as a player. And same with Golden Glue. I don't know. They've been around, I feel like Golden Glue has been around for a long time now.
Yes.
And I guess we'll see how he performs. He's got a starting roster this split, I believe. So we'll see how that goes. But I don't know. I just don't know if they've obviously a lot of teams, they don't have that much confidence in these upcoming NA mids. They'd rather just grab talent off of EU or something like, is it Ica or Ika from the LEC? Yeah, they just rather take the risk on those players rather than taking some talent from NA. So yeah, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on those two upcoming mids?
So Damonte is an interesting one because I think the reason why, a big part of the reason why Clutch Gaming went to Worlds is because they're Lyra and Damonte individually aren't very good mid jungle, even in the context of LCS, but they actually played well together. It was basically Lyra goes mid, 2 of them go to top, or the 2 of them, basically the 2 of them go to the top because bot was kind of do what you will.
Yeah.
Have fun, guys. And then there were a lot of times where I'd be watching a game and it's okay, this guy is playing Kiana. If he does this and they have to make a play here at when he's level 3, or basically the game is lost, and they would actually do that. So they actually understood Kiana and they picked up Kiana early and they were looking for these plays. And obviously Kiana isn't a champion that you actually lane on because she loses everyone. So I think he's an interesting case because you also have him we also have a lot of footage of him against international mids like Xiaohu and Faker, right? At this point, Xiaohu, Faker, and then
Nemesis.
Oh yeah, Nemesis, right? So you have him against these international mids that have a lot of clout, and you famously have that game where he almost gets solo killed by Kale as level 1. So I think a lot of his laning fundamentals still need work. I'll be really interested because obviously we're competing against him in Academy this year. But I think as an individual mid laner, he lacks a lot of baseline ability to execute the lane. So I can see him getting better.
You think he deserves it? There was massive Reddit threads and stuff about how he was robbed, he should have got a team, all that type of stuff. There was all that Reddit hype and then didn't get a team, and then it was everyone just why is no team picking up this native mid laner? Everyone needs to jump on it. But I think it was, I don't think it was that surprising that no team kind of wanted to take the risk, to be honest. What's your thoughts?
It's interesting for sure because it's a battle of, right now he has very good stock, right? He has very high branding. People like him a lot. And so I think it's an interesting interaction of this idea of okay, that's the 100% accurate PR move, right? If you want your team to have a good brand and to look really, really, really good, do a lot of content, have a good wave of information. So the fact that people aren't picking him up despite that indicates that either the bias against NA mids is so high or that he's just not good enough. And it depends on what route you want to go with that and what take you're going. So I think that's like a difficult one to say. I think right now, to be a successful domestic NA mid laner, you have to have a lot of perseverance. A lot of willingness to watch pro view, because you're not going to get accurate practice even like at an amateur level or at even in solo queue to understand how lane matchups should be played. And I think like the number one thing that almost every LCS player fucks up is just like understanding lane matchups and how to play it out, like first wave management, what trade windows to take, like anything like that. So I think that's like the number one thing that if you want to succeed as an NA mid laner, you can do is just work on those things. Like specifically, like don't watch a solo queue as much. Watch as many VODs as you can get from outside so that you can visualize the matchup and at least understand like how you're playing it yourself. So I think for me, like I don't think Tanner is bad. I think that you can argue that he deserves a spot and like he has the talent to like earn his spot and do well. But I can also see why teams chose not to pick him up.
Yeah, I'll go on this angle on that one. Is like, I sort of get why you bring the topic up, Midbeast, because like, put it this way, the response and the backlash was disproportionate. Like they made it sound like Jensen hadn't been picked up for another year. Like they made it seem like, you know, it was an absolute travesty and he's robbed. It's like, no, it's definitely touch and go as to whether he should be in. Like if you just go now, especially now that we know the actual rosters, there's another thing. People didn't know at the time that Froggen would be on this team. It wasn't known that Jizuki was coming. So now that you go and look at the mid lane talent, the only players that like I'm picking between Demonte and this guy is like Golden Glue for Golden Guardians, Rioma for 100 Thieves. Aside from that, like most of the other players, like I don't care what anyone says about Power of Evil, he's better than Demonte. So one of my problems is like I do think it was touch and go. I would maybe pick him up over those players, but in the case of like Rioma, that's just a gamble that you hope he's going to be even better than before. Obviously, the Ica one's a similar thing. You're gambling that he's somehow going to be way better. So the problem is, it's a bit like what happened to Freeze at AD carry in Europe. I think he is a top 10 AD carry in the European region, but I don't think he's going to be like the third best AD carry in the region if you put him on your team. So if you want to gamble and instead of getting the 10th or the 9th best AD carry, gamble for someone who might end up being the 5th best or the 15th, go for it. Like, I can't really blame you. It's just a different philosophy in recruiting. And then in terms of Demonte, I think you've nailed it, because the problem I have with these two mid laners, Demonte and Golden Glue, is they just show you the paucity of talent in North America at mid lane, because there's definitely players in other roles who are among the better in the region, actually. And the reason why, you know, if these are the two best that you can put forwards out of the NA region, now you've just answered why mids aren't good. Because if you could somehow do the fucking Dragon Ball Z fusion dance, or since that's not my era, I did that for like benefit of LS. I'll go into LS's other game, like fucking Brood War. If they were like Archon, where you merge the two High Templars together and they make a super unit, you'd have a fucking good mid laner, because you've got the guy who can just play out the lane, farm, just play the normal champions. That's fine. There's Golden Glue for you. Then you've got the guy who can play the pop-off champions and who can roam and make plays and make. Problem is, separately, they're half a mid laner. Like, as much as we talk in these really broad strokes, but at the same time, very defined lines about Froggen just lanes, or this guy just is a team fight mid laner, like, we take it for granted they are competent in the other areas. They're just not the best in those areas. We're just emphasizing their strengths. It's not like on like the fucking one of those like top trumps cards. Froggen would be 100 for laning and 0 for fucking roaming. No, it's just he chooses not to roam much. There's better players at roaming. There we go. That's a better way to say it. So the problem with Demonte and Golden Glue for me is they're just like decent or good in their areas, but they really lack in the other areas. And the problem is you have to basically play around their strength. And if they're already not the best player at their role, I'm not really a fan of playing the team around the strength of someone who isn't the best anyway. It's like, what's the point in loading up for this guy when he's not going to win the league for us? Like, we might as well go. Like, if I have Huni on my team, of course I'm going to say, Demonte, your job is to get Huni rolling. That's what we do in this team. That's just the reality of it, unfortunately.
I really want to underline, though, that I don't think that they're untalented. I actually really admire and a lot of people say, well, they've been around forever. They've had so many chances. But the thing is that this is like the first, like Demonte has been around for a while, but this is the first year where he's gotten to have a full split playing starting LCS, because in spring he didn't even have a full split, right? You had like literally they put in Piglet mid.
Yeah.
So this is the first year where he's had a full split in LCS, and the competition in Academy, like I really think it's starting to level up, but it's not this. It doesn't adequately prepare you right now for LCS. So you have to put in a lot of time, like visualizing and thinking about how things should theoretically be played to succeed in LCS. I think to make that jump, you have to be like really, really dedicated, because there is a lot stacked against you. Like it's not as easy to succeed as if you're coming from a background with a better like building point amateur system. Like part of the reason why like we were so impressed with Ryoma is because we do think he has a lot of fundamentals that other OCE and even NA mid laners don't have, because he has put in a lot of that time to like visualize and understand matchups outside of what he's capable of playing like within Oceania. So I think that's one of the big calling cards that we had, like, and why he was impressive to us. And I think that like Golden Glue and Damonte can have that. It's just taking them a little bit longer. So when people say, oh, they've been around forever, they've had a chance, like I feel like saying they really haven't, you know? So I'm excited to see what Golden Glue can do. I think that first of all, to talk about Golden Glue, the Scrim Golden Glue meme is actually 100% true. So we'll see if you can actually pull it out on stage this year. I'm kind of curious.
One thing I'll say, by the way, that I do actually admire about both players, Damonte and Golden Glue, is actually that they are resilient. They don't quit. Like, I actually appreciate, like, for example, I even told Golden Glue this directly, like, publicly and privately, like, I actually admire that he went to Korea and tried to level up and do all those fucking boot camps. It just isn't that cool a story in real life, because he didn't actually get that much better. Like, he's just still like the same sort of player. So it's like, you know, this isn't a fucking Dragon Ball Z episode. You can't just go into the hyperbolic time chamber and come out like 7 levels up or whatever. Like, unfortunately, so that probably just gets you into whatever your peak shape is for whoever you are now. So it's cool on one level. Like, other players wouldn't do that. A lot of other players, if their first chance failed, they'll just quit, or they'll become a streamer, or they'll play but they'll lose faith and they'll just play for the sake of a check or something. I appreciate that these two guys really believe they can make it. I'm just skeptical as to whether they can. You know, unfortunately, it's not a Disney movie. Like, this doesn't not necessarily a happy ending on this one. Sometimes, as me and Monty have many times said, in real life, sometimes the rich kid whose dad owns the team and who's been a massive dick to you actually does score the 2 winning goals, and then all the girls just like him. Like, there is no. That's why the fantasy movie has to have the nerd be the one who wins. Like, because it's so implausible. You know, just reality. I'm afraid, guys.
I respect Golden Glue so much for that, actually. I feel like after he failed once and he did like, he was kind of kicked out, wasn't too sure what he was going to do. I feel like he could have easily went the streaming route, the easier path, but he just said, no, I want to be I want to be the best. I want to be the pro player. He just grinded it. Now, hopefully, back on a good roster, like, we can see what he's going to do. But I mean, not the best roster, obviously, but he's going to have a lot of scrim time, which is so valuable. Being able to scrim all the best teams, all the best mids, like day in, day out, in opposed to being on an academy team, not having like anyone like high profile to scrim and learn against. It's like you're just gonna just gonna get so much better, so much quicker than if you're like just stuck on an academy team. So we'll see what happens, I guess.
Plus, here's the thing: it is the right team for him. Like, another problem he had was, yeah, you know what? If you're the backup on Cloud9, if you play sometimes and you have a good game, oh my God, is he going to make it? Like, that's not the right team for you. Like, play on the team that everyone's predicting is going to be the worst in the league. Now, if you show us anything competent, like if you're like a mid-table mid laner on that team, you'll get some props now. You'll actually get the respect that maybe you deserve. You're not ever going to get that if you're replacing Jensen. Like, you're never going to be Jensen. All that everyone's going to see is you are everything that you are not that Jensen is. That's all they'll ever be able to. I couldn't get past that a lot of the time. But I mean, to be fair, Jensen was way better.
I will say the downside, obviously, is that we've talked about mid laners in this episode who we felt like could have had careers, and then they played on like the shit team. And even if we saw like competency and good skill in them, they didn't necessarily get opportunities after that. But I think that Golden Glue has shown the resilience that if that happens, like, he might stay in, and maybe his mentality is kind of, I don't really have anything to lose at this point, right? I'm going to take my shot, and hopefully it works out.
I think he'll come out swinging this split for sure. He's going to try and definitely put something out there and just take massive risks. I don't see why he wouldn't. I feel like he's the type of guy who said, like, this team, you know, there's nothing to lose, really. If we don't do well no big deal. So he's just going to go out and just try and make a bang. So that's going to be.
There's actually one player we didn't mention that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up. So we'll make this like the last topic. And obviously it's interesting at the moment because he's actually just role swapped. And that is the infamous Phoenix of Team Liquid. Later on, obviously a whole bunch of different squad, Echo Fox going on. Now, this is a player where, again, this guy had an incredibly strong Reddit narrative because in the season 5 period when Team Liquid, people forget this, in the regular seasons, they were actually the best team. They actually were supposed to go to Worlds and maybe even win LCS that year, but they just were terrible in the playoffs for whatever reason. And for a lot of different reasons that aren't just about Phoenix, by the way. But since this is when he had his now very famous outplay on Azir, where he went 1v5 under the tower or whatever the fuck, which was a sick play, and he was very good on that champion. I feel like history diverged then into alternate realities, and I went off in the alternate reality where I just kept watching him and going he's like an average to above average mid laner, but I wouldn't say he's anywhere close to the best. And then everyone else was like he's among the best. It's him and Bjergsen. So our timelines just split on that one. Kelsey, where did you actually come down on him as a player? Because he's played for a long time now.
I think his laning is not bad. In terms of like when he was playing LCS, his laning was pretty good, but he has like a very specific champion pool. Like I would say, okay, he goes Ryze, Azir, and then he's going to be good on those champions for sure, right? But like, where do you go from there after that? I think that Echo Fox was kind of like a doomed situation for him because he's really, really like he doesn't. The reason why he was good with Dardoch is because, and then I did an article on this because people were talking about how much time Dardoch spends around Huni, but it was actually like almost always level 3, like clockwork, he would be mid lane. And I think Phoenix doesn't really respect junglers when he plays up. His mid-wave management isn't too nuanced because he'll basically just push for crash and then play over that. So I think that having a jungler that can play to Phoenix's pace is very important. And Echo Fox went through like so many iterations of jungle this year, like they had Rush, they had Mike Young, etc. And there wasn't really one that fit him too well because you want with Phoenix someone who's just gonna like 2v2 around mid perma. And I don't know if he's worth that though, because his champion pool is limited. So he's like a very kind of niche. You have to absolutely play one way with Phoenix, but I do think he's very good at that way of playing.
I agree. I think his control mages are really good, but yeah, outside of that, I'm not too sure what you would pick him up for. He's not that diverse. I don't know. I feel like he's always been like that middle of the pack mid laner. His mechanic, I feel like his mechanics are very high, but I don't know, I just feel like he's a bit coin flip, not that methodical kind of player. So yeah, I don't know. What is he? I'm not even sure what he's doing this split.
He's actually role swapped to play AD carry on what team is it?
Dignitas Academy.
Oh, it's Academy actually, yeah. The
Dig Academy. Okay, yeah. That Dig Academy roster is actually freaky good. Yeah.
Where's the funny thing? Is if you actually think about it, Kelsey, I mean, I realize obviously it's like a ridiculous like theory craft that he has to actually do it in the game. AD carry might be the fucking role for this guy. Like, just stay in the lane, farm, the support will try and help you. Like, you might even, I mean, to be fair, there's a lot more nuanced AD carry in the modern day than there was 3 years ago, but that's not a terrible role necessary for him to play. I don't think, like, as you said, part of the problem about what you were outlining before is if you want to compare him as his skill would demand to the best mids in the NA region, he's not playing mid lane. Like, they play the game and then you can do things with them. Like, they'll roam to your lane or you can go and set up a specific comp that works around that. It's like, in his particular case, you have to, like, cover his weaknesses before he can get to the point you want to be at in the game and get the kind of wins you do. So I feel like mid lane just isn't the right role for him, which is funny because he actually started as a top laner, if people don't know, back in, believe it or not, on Jin. Oh God, why do we keep recruiting Jin players? Like, it's not working, boys. But never mind. Put that to one side. You don't need to think about that NAGMs.
It's funny because I actually do think Jenner has like decent scouting.
They're pretty good scouting, don't they?
Yeah, but it's decent scouting, but terrible team building. So they'll get like one really cool player, and then they'll put like crappy players around him, and then that guy gets picked up, and it's a vicious cycle.
Well, the thing is, to be fair, if they are secretly, like, they're not, obviously, they're trying to do the best they can. But just to make it fun, I'd like to imagine they are a really cynical farm team. And so that's why they do it, Kelsey. It's like when you have jobbers in the WWE who, like, lose to the guy who's up and coming to put him over, to, like, make him look like he's on a sick win streak. You get the good player, and then you're like, right, this AD carry's sick. Make everyone else pure trash on the team so that he has to play 40-minute games all the time, and he's going to showcase his entire skills. Like, look, if you buy the new Lexus, it's off-road, it goes here, there, you know, it can switch gears. It's like, you get to show all that it can do, and then someone buys it for a really expensive price, right? Whereas if you just put him on, like, an actual proper team, maybe you wouldn't see any of that. So you wouldn't see that the one guy stood out from all the shit around him, would you? You'd go, it's just an all right team. So from that angle, they're doing a bang-up job. I just don't believe that anyone's actually doing that. Like, even I'm not that cynical to believe that.
There are some conversations, I think, about like what teams are basically trying to sell players, and that's how they're going to make their profit, just because, like, holy shit, there's still like so little profit right now. But you know, this is life.
Well, I'm curious.
So I mean, it's not too far outside of the realm of possibility that they would do that, though. It's the funny.
Curious, I think, of your opinions on Mickey, the mid laner.
Bro, obviously was briefly in NA, yeah, sure.
This is a fun topic for sure.
Come on.
I think Mickey is definitely underrated. I feel like if he was in the right environment on the right team, he could have gone really far.
What type of a team would he need, though?
Just a supportive jungler. It's just someone to keep him in line, keep his mental straight. I'm not sure what type of jungler he would synergize very well with. He's kind of that coin flip player, but I think that he has a very high skill ceiling, but he just, obviously, with his mental, and I think he's playing for, is it Excel now in the LEC?
Yeah, yes. He's playing for Excel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wish he could have got a chance on a top team, but I think I guess we'll see how he goes next split. But yeah, you don't.
I'm gonna disagree on that one. I think he's definitely interesting because, like, he can, like, have some really pop-up moments, but he's like the kind of player that you describe as, like, really feast or famine, right?
Exactly.
So
yeah.
that's why I kind of have, like, a slight issue with him. But like, I don't mind those players. I like players who, like, go for the low percentage players, but I feel like his rate of execution is more accurate to how low percentage play is, right? So you always talk about UZI who goes for like 60-40s or sometimes even like 30-80s, 30-70s or whatever, but he makes it work like at a higher rate than it should. Whereas I feel like Mickey X, he'll go for like 50-50s and he'll have 50-50 execution rate. So that's kind of my issue with him. But when he gets it, it's like really, really fun to watch for sure. But yeah, he's a really nuanced and interesting topic. Because I heard that on Excel, he's actually like working on being a mentor figure and trying to be a leader. But that was not the case while he was in NA. On any team that he was on, he was like very kind of, so maybe it was more of a, oh shit, I got fired from every team that I was on for this, so I have to clean up my act. Excel is my last chance. Like, I don't know if this was the mentality for him, but yeah. So he's an interesting one.
Right, first of all, on the last part there, I'll give you my take on it. It's like when people go to university and they study a subject, like a classic example is like philosophy, and another one would be like psychiatry. Because the joke that people say about people who study these topics, but it's true, is like, what would your motivation be to study those topics? So I can tell you, if you study philosophy, the motivation is you're searching for meaning in life. Like, you're like, what the fuck is this life? Like, what is it? Do I just get a job and then die? And like, so what you want to do is you want to know, is there some deep shit out there? So that's why you take that subject. If you do psychiatry, it's very famous that like psychiatrists themselves have psychiatrists. Like, they're all fucked up. Like, so the joke is like they're trying to heal themselves first. So what Mickey's doing there is he's like, right, I've got this rep as an arsehole. How do I become a good person TM? Right, I'm going to become like a mentor. How do I reach these kids, man? Like, he's trying to like do that shit, which is like, it's certainly one angle. It's a bit whack. I agree though. The problem I have with Mickey is this. When he has his games that he's on, I kind of see why Midbeast says he has a high skill ceiling. He can definitely do some crazy pop-off shit. Like, he's one of those players that the word pop-off's pretty much invented for. Like, they just go absolutely crazy in the server. The problem is this. If you look at the team he played for when he was in Korea, when he was on the Rebels Anarchy team, which was at the time one of the worst teams in LCK. But that's the point. If you're normally on the worst team in LCK, you're just shit. And so what happens is you just get donked on by everyone in the league and everyone waits for you to get relegated. But since he was on one of the worst teams, but then let's say every 1 in 4 games, he would just get the right champion and go crazy. Well, no one's watching all the other games. No one's watching every Rebels Anarchy game. So what happens is they look on Reddit and they go, holy shit, this guy had like 11 kills. And then they watch that highlight game and they go, this guy's sick. And it's like, he's not actually, if you watch every game. Like, I can get why, like, for example, there's a good reason why the top Korean teams didn't scout him. Like, it's not like they don't want talent. They have fucking sick talents on their bench that don't get to play. Like, some of the people who've become successful LPL mid laners never got a fucking chance to get a starting spot in LCK, but showed themselves later to be beast players. So I don't think that every team in the LPL and every team in the LCK are idiots and just looked past this guy and thought, well, I could probably pick him up for next to nothing, but I'll just choose not to. I think they probably saw his downside as well. So I do think he can certainly, I think he could play an LCS and now an LEC player. It's just, I think he probably should be on one of the worst teams. Like, I don't think he should be on a good team. I wouldn't build a team around him, put it that way.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want my mid laner to be a coin flip player.
Yeah, okay. What's your thoughts on Ryoma, I guess, coming in from...
I know nothing about him. I mean, Kelsey obviously being in 100 Thieves has some insight. I actually just know nothing about him. I've never watched the OPL whatsoever, basically. Like, maybe the odd finals back in the day if the team was in Worlds or something, but I don't know anything about this player. So part of me wants to believe, because this happens in some games, that you could have someone from a region who's just way better than their region. Like in Counter-Strike, we actually have this. We have a player who's from Bosnia who, I know in League of Legends, you're going to be like, that's not relevant. No, it's not relevant in CSGO. There's no one from Bosnia ever in the history of Counter-Strike. In fact, that whole Balkan region has never had a player, basically, that was ever relevant in Counter-Strike. And this guy from Bosnia, when he got to FaZe Clan, which is a big international team, wasn't just good. He was like the best player in the world. He was like unbelievably good. So I want to believe there's a talent out there that you can take who's like a mega talent and can transcend his region. The problem will always be, though, until they get the chance to do that, you don't know if that's what they are or they were just the big fish in the small pond. So that's also my worry, that if Ryoma's got this hype from being an Oceania and OPL, maybe the best OPL player just ranks as an okay mid laner if you come to LCS. I don't know what the talent difference is personally. Give us your thoughts.
I think he's a very good mid laner. I think his mechanics are up there. Like, his mechanics are definitely up there. Like, I've versed him so many times. I've versed a lot of good mid laners like Caps and stuff. He has that finesse to make the plays, but it's just kind of lacking, I feel like, the discipline at the moment and the fundamentals, but hopefully that type of stuff will come. But I don't know, it's so hard to see, like, how good is he, because he's versing these Oceanic mid laners who, you know, they're barely professional players. Like, you could some of them, like, you could hardly like rate them as pros. So it's like, on one hand, he's dominating them, putting massive stats up. The other hand, it's like, well, let's just see how he does against like people like the Bjergs and like Jensen, and just see if he can do the same type of thing. Maybe he can pop off and have the confidence with his mechanics, but I don't know. I think it's going to be a bit of a coin flip, honestly.
I will say,
so exciting.
Like, obviously, Kelsey, you can give us your thoughts, but I will just add in as a detail. One thing that did give me a little bit of hope, because again, I don't know this as a player, is that when I first heard the move, I also thought, like, Jesus, is that your first move, Papa Smithy? Like, go to an American team and just be like, haha, I've got a secret pipeline to Australian players. But one thing that gave me confidence that wasn't necessarily true is the reason why he wasn't just instantly announced is there was other teams that wanted this guy as well and that were looking at him. And in theory, I've heard there was like a few people who were sort of in the race or looking at him or potentially bidding for him. So apparently it wasn't just like one person. It was like a bunch of people scouted him and thought this is someone worth giving a shot to. What would you say on your side, Kelsey?
So I think the thing about Ryoma is we were looking at like a bunch of different pickups. One thing that struck us is that, like, not only did he have like mechanical talent comparable to so he was kind of in the category of like developmental pieces. But the thing about him was not only did he have like mechanical talent that was interesting, but he also had a baseline of like laning knowledge that we didn't expect from his region or from like NA mids. So that was something that he'd basically done on his own or from his coaching staff on previous teams that he would have to be like self-disciplined enough to learn. I will say that the one criticism that I hear about him that is really funny to me, because I see it as almost attractive, is that like he plays too far forward, or he goes too ham, or he looks for too many things, and that's like, I feel like that's a quality that you actually want in mids that you bring to NA, because a lot of NA mids, NA region mids, like not NA born mids, but a lot of NA region mids currently, like we talked about the Bjergsen model, all of this, don't currently have that, where they just like go for the lower percentage plays and are willing to try to execute like those types of things. And I think that that's something that is really funny when I hear a lot of people say that this is a criticism of him and this is a problem with him, but I think it's something that's attractive about him.
Yeah, he's very similar to Caps, honestly. Like he'll do those low percentage, you know, I'll base here, and you think both mid laners are base, and he'll do like a cheeky stay on like 10 health. Like he just does really out of the box things, but he's willing to take the risk to make that play, which is, I just love that in mid laners. I don't like people traditional do the safest thing. Like if he wants to go for a play that's like 10% chance, he's going to push for it. If there's that 10% chance, he's going to make that play. So hopefully he can convert that onto the big stage. I don't know like how he's going to be playing in that big league, because like Oceania, it's just, you don't get those like nerves. You don't get that. It's just completely different. So hopefully he can be confident on stage and go for the plays.
This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Emanuel Särnbratt, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, the Puyallup Tribe, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Maybe ask a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on my next content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those donated discussions with me where we go really deep into the weeds. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the description box link below.